Déjà vu. This is one of the most common real-life glitches. A strange sensation most of us have felt at least once. It's the uncanny feeling that the present moment is repeating itself, as if we've already stood here, heard these words, or seen this exact scene before. Surveys suggest that nearly 2/3 of people experience déjà vu in their lifetime. Across history, the phenomenon has been given many meanings. In ancient traditions, it was linked to reincarnation, explained as memories from previous lives. In the 19th century, some writers described it as a glimpse of dreams bleeding into waking reality. But modern neuroscience offers a more grounded explanation. Researchers have found that déjà vu happens when the brain's recognition system briefly misfires. Normally, the hippocampus distinguishes between new experiences and stored memories. But sometimes, because of stress, fatigue, or small timing errors in neural circuits, the present is mistakenly flagged as familiar. Functional MRI studies have observed this false signal in areas of the brain that handle recognition and recollection. What feels like stepping back into the past is often just two memory pathways falling out of sync. Clinical reports add to the picture. Some people with temporal lobe epilepsy experience déjà vu just before seizures, suggesting abnormal electrical activity can trigger the effect. Yet the vast majority of episodes happen in healthy individuals, showing how easy it is for perception and memory to overlap. Culturally mysterious, but scientifically ordinary, déjà vu reveals the fragile line between recognition and experience. The fact to remember is that déjà vu isn't a glitch in time or proof of past lives. It's a moment when the brain's memory system stumbles, briefly convincing us we've lived the present before. Synchronicity. A woman thinks of an old friend she hasn't spoken to in years. Moments later, her phone buzzes with a message from that exact person. To her, it feels uncanny, like the universe answered a thought. This kind of meaningful coincidence is what Carl Jung called synchronicity. The idea first gained attention in the 20th century, when Jung described it as two events connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. To those experiencing it, synchronicity feels like hidden design, a personal signal written into the world. Cultural traditions long before Jung also pointed to signs and omens, where unrelated events were linked through interpretation. Science takes a different angle. Researchers studying probability and attention note that coincidences are statistically inevitable. With billions of daily thoughts and actions, it's not surprising that some align in striking ways. The human brain, tuned to spot patterns, highlights those rare alignments while discarding the countless times nothing matched. A 2004 study by mathematician David Hand described these events as the improbability principle, showing how apparently impossible coincidences happen regularly once you account for the sheer volume of life's events. Still, the personal weight of synchronicity is real. When timing feels perfect, a song lyric aligning with a mood, a symbol appearing right when you need it, the experience can reinforce belief, motivation, or connection. It doesn't mean the world is coded for you, but it does reveal how meaning is constructed in the mind. What actually matters is that synchronicity shows how easily our brains can weave randomness into narrative. The coincidences are real, but the story we attach to them is the glitch that turns chance into destiny. Pareidolia, a piece of burnt toast pulled from the oven once sold for thousands of dollars. Why? Because people swore they could see the face of the Virgin Mary scorched into its surface. What looks like divine intervention to some is, in fact, a classic example of pareidolia. The phenomenon is common. A cloud shaped like a rabbit, a power socket that seems to smile back at you, the man in the moon. Across cultures and centuries, people have reported faces or figures hidden in random patterns. In medieval Europe, unusual rock formations were said to hold religious meaning. In modern times, social media amplifies these sightings, with every oddly shaped shadow or reflection framed as uncanny proof that reality is winking at us. Neuroscience offers a straightforward explanation. Human survival depended on quickly detecting faces and figures, recognizing friend from foe in an instant. The brain's fusiform face area is so sensitive that it sometimes overfires, spotting a face where none exists. In a 2009 fMRI study, participants shown random noise patterns activated the same face processing circuits as when they looked at actual faces. The system errs on the side of false positives because missing a real face would carry a greater cost. Yet the experience remains strangely magical. What begins as a visual misfire becomes charged with meaning because we can't help but project stories onto what we see. A coffee stain isn't just a blot, it's a profile, a sign, maybe even a message. The fact to remember is that pareidolia is not evidence of hidden messages in the world. It is evidence of how powerfully our brains search for order, even when reality is just noise. Sleep paralysis. In 1664, a Dutch physician described patients who woke in the night convinced that a dark figure was pressing on their chest. They struggled to breathe, unable to move, certain they were under attack. Centuries later, the same reports appear across the world, from Japan's Kanashibari to Newfoundland's Old Hag. Today, we know this terrifying experience as sleep paralysis. The glitch occurs in the borderland between sleep and wakefulness. During REM sleep, the brain shuts down muscle movement so we don't act out our dreams. If the mind wakes before the body does, consciousness returns while the muscles remain locked. For the person lying in bed, that gap creates the sense of being trapped inside their own body. The hallucinations that often accompany it have a biological explanation too. Brain regions active during dreaming can still be firing, projecting images and sounds into waking awareness. A shadow in the corner, footsteps in the hall, or a figure at the bedside all feel vividly real because they come from the same circuits that create dream reality. In a 2011 survey, more than 30% of people reported experiencing sleep paralysis at least once, showing how common this overlap truly is. What once fueled folklore of demons and night spirits is now understood as a simple timing error between systems that usually stay in sync. The fear is real, the visions are real to the brain, but the cause is not supernatural. In practice, this means that sleep paralysis is not a sign of danger or possession. It is a harmless, if frightening, reminder of how fragile the boundary between dreaming and waking can be. A moment when the body lags behind the mind. Placebo effect. In the 1950s, a surgeon named Henry Beecher treated wounded soldiers in World War II. When morphine supplies ran out, he injected men with simple saline solution instead. To his surprise, many reported pain relief strong enough to allow surgery. This striking case became one of the most famous examples of the placebo effect. The placebo effect occurs when a treatment with no active ingredient still produces real improvement. It isn't just in the mind. Brain imaging studies have shown that when someone believes they're receiving pain medication, their brain actually releases endorphins and activates the same neural pathways as if they had taken the drug. In trials for antidepressants, painkillers, and even Parkinson's treatments, placebos have triggered measurable benefits for a portion of patients. Historically, the effect was often dismissed as deception. In older medical traditions, healers relied on rituals, colored powders, or elaborate procedures that worked largely through expectation. Modern science reframes it differently. Belief and context can activate the body's own chemical responses. A capsule's color, a doctor's confidence, even the setting of treatment can influence outcomes. The power of the placebo also explains why rigorous clinical trials must compare new drugs against placebo groups. Without that control, it's impossible to know whether the improvement came from the treatment itself or from the brain's self-generated response. The fact to remember is that the placebo effect is not a cure, but a glitch in how expectation rewires perception and pain. It shows that belief alone can alter brain chemistry, a reminder that sometimes the story the mind tells is powerful enough to change the body. Dream incorporation. A blaring alarm clock goes off at 7 a.m., but instead of waking immediately, you find yourself still asleep. The sound has woven itself perfectly into the plot of your dream. Maybe it's a siren in the distance, a school bell, or part of a song. This seamless blending is called dream incorporation. The phenomenon is surprisingly common. Sleep researchers have documented cases where everything from the sound of running water to the sensation of a blanket slipping became integrated into the dream narrative. In one controlled study, participants exposed to subtle noises while in REM sleep often dreamed of situations that explained the sound, showing how flexible the dreaming mind can be. The mechanics are straightforward. During REM sleep, the brain remains highly active, processing memories, emotions, and sensations. External stimuli, like a noise, a touch, or even an odor, can slip past the brain's filters. Instead of waking you up immediately, the dream adapts, folding the new input into whatever storyline is already running. Historically, this blending was seen as mystical. In ancient cultures, dreams that echoed real-world events were taken as prophecies or divine messages. Today, we understand it more as a defense against interruption. The brain buys a few more minutes of sleep by explaining away the intrusion. The result is often uncanny. A car horn outside becomes part of a chase sequence, or the ring of a phone shows up in dialogue before pulling you into wakefulness. For a moment, the real and the imagined run in perfect parallel. In practice, this means dream incorporation is not a glimpse into another world, but a clever glitch. The brain's way of patching reality into the dream until you finally wake. Uncanny Valley. You watch a humanoid robot smile. Its gestures are almost natural. Its voice nearly human. Its eyes close to lifelike. And yet, instead of reassurance, the reaction is discomfort. The closer the figure comes to looking real, the more unsettling it feels. This dip in acceptance is known as the Uncanny Valley. The idea was first described by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori, who noticed that people respond positively as machines appear more human-like, until they become almost real, but not quite. At that point, the imitation feels disturbing. Lifelike dolls, wax figures, and certain CGI characters often fall into this zone, where realism creates unease rather than comfort. Psychologists suggest several explanations. One view argues that imperfect human replicas activate evolved sensitivities to disease or death, since pale skin, rigid posture, or mismatched expressions resemble illness. Another perspective points to prediction error. Our brains are finely tuned to track human movement and facial signals, and when those signals don't match, the mismatch triggers discomfort. In 2016, researchers at the University of California found heightened activity in brain regions linked to conflict detection when participants viewed nearly human androids, suggesting the brain processes them as perceptual glitches. Cultural interpretations echo this unease. Folklore often treated human-like figures, dolls, mannequins, or effigies, as vessels for spirits or curses. Modern horror films use the same effect, amplifying the lifeless but almost living stare that unsettles viewers, even when nothing is happening. The Uncanny Valley isn't about machines or special effects alone. It is about us. The razor-thin margin our minds draw between what feels convincingly alive and what feels disturbingly off. Anemoia, a song from decades ago, plays on the radio, maybe a crackling jazz tune or a disco anthem, and suddenly a wave of longing washes over you. The strange part is, you never lived in that era. This sensation, called anemoia, is a kind of misplaced nostalgia. While not a clinical term, anemoia captures a real emotional glitch. People often feel drawn to times they never experience firsthand, whether it's the 1920s, the 1960s, or even a childhood they know only through old family photographs. Psychologists link this to how memory and imagination overlap. Brain imaging shows that the same neural networks that reconstruct the past also simulate possible futures or fictional scenarios. When you picture yourself in another time, the brain may tag that simulation with the same emotional weight it assigns to genuine memory. Cultural forces amplify this effect. Films, music, and social media frequently romanticize the past, highlighting aesthetics and moments stripped of their hardships. When these stylized portrayals are repeated, the brain builds a template of false familiarity. It's why vintage footage can stir the same emotions as personal memories. A 2019 study on media nostalgia found that people reported strong personal connections, even to periods they never lived through, showing just how easily collective culture can create personal longing. Historically, this has surfaced in surprising ways. The Victorians idealized medieval chivalry, while the 1970s saw a revival of 1950s culture. Each wave of nostalgia included people with no direct experience of the time being celebrated. What actually matters is that anemoia reveals how flexible memory and meaning really are. The longing feels authentic, but it is constructed. A glitch where imagination masquerades as lived experience. Hypnic jerk. Most people have felt it. You're drifting at the edge of sleep when your body suddenly snaps awake. The jolt is sharp, almost as if you've stumbled, even though you haven't moved from your bed or chair. This brief, startling event is known as a hypnic jerk. Sleep researchers classify it as one of the most common phenomena during the transition into rest. Studies estimate that up to 70% of people experience it, especially in periods of fatigue or high stress. As the nervous system winds down, muscles loosen, breathing slows, and the brain shifts gears. But occasionally, the process misfires. A burst of activity rushes through the body, snapping it back into wakefulness. One leading theory suggests that the reflex has evolutionary roots. As the body relaxes, the brain may misinterpret the sensation as a loss of balance. To protect the sleeper, it triggers a rapid contraction of muscles. In a distant past, when humans or their ancestors may have slept in precarious positions such as trees, this reflex could have prevented dangerous falls. Cultural interpretations added their own explanations. In European folklore, a hypnic jerk might have been seen as a sign of a spirit's interference. In other traditions, it was linked to the soul temporarily leaving the body during sleep. While these accounts gave the event symbolic meaning, neuroscience explains it as a simple misalignment between body and brain during the fragile onset of sleep. The hypnic jerk is harmless, though it can be startling enough to interrupt the path into rest. Rather than a warning of danger, it is a leftover reflex, a quick reminder that the machinery of sleep doesn't always shift smoothly, even in something as ordinary as drifting off. Quantum immortality. A man drives through an intersection as a truck barrels toward him. At the last second, he swerves, missing impact by inches. His heart races with the realization he should not have survived. To him, it feels like chance. To some theorists, it represents something stranger: quantum immortality. The idea grows from interpretations of quantum mechanics, particularly the many worlds view proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. According to this theory, every possible outcome of a quantum event actually occurs, each in its own branching universe. Extend this logic to life and death moments, and a radical suggestion emerges. In universes where you don't survive, your consciousness ends. But in at least one branch, you always continue, giving you the subjective impression of never dying. While no scientific consensus accepts this as fact, the concept has fascinated philosophers, physicists, and science fiction writers alike. It raises eerie questions about survival against impossible odds. Reports of people living through multiple near-death accidents, like Croatian man Frane Selak, who escaped plane crashes, car explosions, and train wrecks before eventually winning the lottery, fuel public imagination, even if coincidence offers a simpler explanation. Critics argue that quantum immortality is untestable, making it more thought experiment than theory. Yet its appeal lies in how it reframes mortality. If consciousness only ever persists in the branch where it survives, then subjectively, an individual might feel invincible, even though countless versions of them do not make it. What actually matters is that quantum immortality remains a speculative glitch, not evidence you can cheat death, but a reminder of how physics and perception collide to make survival feel like something more than luck. Tip of the tongue phenomenon. You're in the middle of telling a story when the perfect word stalls mid-thought. You gesture, pause, maybe swap in another phrase, but the exact word remains just out of reach. The moment is familiar to almost everyone, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's one of the most universal glitches in memory. Studies suggest nearly all adults experience it, often several times a week. Linguists describe it as a retrieval block. The brain holds the word, but the access route misfires. That's why people often recall its first letter, number of syllables, or similar sounding terms, even when the target refuses to come. Psychologists have tracked this experience for more than a century. William James described it as a fringe of consciousness, knowledge hovering just beyond reach. Modern neuroscience supports this idea. Brain imaging shows that during tip-of-the-tongue states, the anterior cingulate cortex, a region tied to conflict detection, becomes active, as if the brain knows the answer is there but can't unlock it. Cultural explanations have been just as inventive. In some traditions, a forgotten word meant someone was gossiping about you. Others imagined memory not in the brain, but in the heart or the soul, with lapses reflecting disturbances there. Today, research paints a simpler picture. The memory itself is intact, but the pathway is blocked. The tip of the tongue state passes, sometimes resolved by sudden recall hours later, sometimes forgotten entirely. Rather than a sign of decline, it reflects how memory works in fragments and networks, and how even a small misfire can momentarily separate us from a word we know perfectly well. False awakening. The alarm clock buzzes. You sit up, stretch, and start your morning routine. But as you head to the door, something feels wrong. The walls shift, the light bends, and then you jolt awake in bed, realizing you never got up at all. This looping illusion is called a false awakening. Reports of false awakenings go back centuries. Writers and philosophers describe dreams where they believed they had risen from bed, only to find themselves still asleep. In some cases, the cycle repeats multiple times, creating the unsettling impression of being trapped in an endless reset. Neuroscience explains it through the mechanics of REM sleep. During dreaming, the brain's visual and motor systems are highly active, generating convincing simulations of real life. If the dream focuses on waking itself, the result is a dream so realistic that it feels indistinguishable from reality. EEG studies show that false awakenings often occur during transitions between REM and lighter sleep stages, when awareness begins to creep in, but full consciousness has not yet returned. Cultural interpretations once framed these episodes as signs of spiritual journeys or warnings from beyond. In folklore, repeatedly waking up inside a dream was sometimes linked to the soul wandering or to omens of misfortune. Today, researchers view it as a benign misfire. The brain rehearses waking before actually allowing the body to emerge from sleep. Though harmless, false awakenings can leave people disoriented or anxious, particularly if combined with sleep paralysis or vivid dream imagery. The memory of waking again and again lingers even after full consciousness has returned. The fact to remember is that false awakenings are not supernatural loops, but brief timing errors, moments when the dream world perfectly imitates reality before letting go. Mass hysteria. In 1962, a girls' school in Tanzania erupted in uncontrollable laughter. It spread from student to student, then into nearby villages, eventually lasting months and disrupting thousands of lives. Doctors found no virus, no toxin, no clear medical cause. What happened was mass hysteria, also known as mass psychogenic illness. Mass hysteria occurs when groups of people develop shared symptoms without a physical trigger. The symptoms can range from fainting and nausea to shaking, convulsions, or uncontrollable laughter. What begins with one or two cases spreads quickly through social contact, observation, and suggestion. In a tightly knit group under stress, the brain's interpretation of threat or illness can leap from person to person. History is filled with striking examples. In medieval Europe, outbreaks of so-called dancing plagues saw crowds convulsing or moving for days without explanation. In the 1980s, a fainting epidemic in a US textile factory led investigators to test the air for toxins, but nothing was found. Each time, the pattern followed the same arc: a stressful environment, a triggering symptom, and rapid spread through social reinforcement. Modern neuroscience suggests the mechanism lies in the brain's mirror systems and heightened attention. When one person exhibits distress, others unconsciously mimic or anticipate the same sensation. Stress hormones amplify the effect, making the experience feel vividly real. Functional brain scans show that perceived symptoms can activate the same neural pathways as actual illness. In practice, this means mass hysteria is not a sign of collective madness, but a reminder of how powerfully human perception is shaped by context. When fear or stress runs high, the boundary between imagination and reality can dissolve, and entire groups can glitch together. Jamais Vu. A man writes the word door over and over during a psychology experiment. After a dozen repetitions, the word suddenly looks strange, hollow, foreign, as if he has never seen it before. Nothing about the page has changed, yet his brain insists it has. This is Jamais Vu, often described as the opposite of Déjà Vu. Where déjà vu creates false familiarity, jamais vu creates sudden strangeness. The face of a friend, the layout of a familiar street, even the spelling of a common word can abruptly feel alien. The effect usually lasts only seconds, but in that time, the world seems unrecognizable. Researchers have studied this phenomenon for more than a century. In controlled tests, participants asked to repeat or write simple words often report the same odd detachment. The word no longer feels real. Neuroscientists link it to disruptions in the brain's recognition circuits, particularly in the temporal lobe. Instead of confirming something as known, the system slips, and familiarity is replaced by novelty. Cultural interpretations once cast this as a sign of enchantment or loss of memory. In literature, writers use jamais vu to symbolize alienation or estrangement, capturing the unsettling sense of being surrounded by things that should feel safe but don't. Today, we recognize it as a rare but natural misfire in perception, often triggered by fatigue, repetition, or stress. Though brief and harmless, the effect highlights how fragile recognition can be. The world doesn't change, but your brain's labeling system does, leaving you momentarily unmoored in your own surroundings. The fact to remember is that jamais vu isn't proof that reality shifted. It's evidence that even the most familiar details rely on neural circuits that can glitch without warning. Déjà Entendu. Some conversations feel strangely familiar the moment they reach your ears. A phrase, a sentence, even a passing remark can land with the eerie conviction that you've heard it before. This fleeting sensation is known as déjà entendu, the experience of already heard. Though less famous than déjà vu, déjà entendu has been observed in psychological studies and described in countless personal reports. It is a memory glitch tied directly to sound. People often recall the feeling that a word, a melody, or even their own thought is repeating itself, though no clear memory explains why. Neuroscience suggests the effect comes from a misalignment between auditory processing and memory tagging. The auditory cortex registers incoming sound, while the medial temporal lobe judges whether it is new or familiar. When these systems fall out of sync, a current sound may trigger the sensation of recollection. Clinical evidence shows the link clearly. In some patients with temporal lobe epilepsy, déjà entendu occurs just before seizures. Cultural interpretations gave the experience symbolic meaning. In some traditions, words that felt pre-heard were seen as signs of prophecy or spiritual guidance. Writers and musicians have described it as an echo, a layering of past and present that makes sound itself feel uncanny. For most people, the glitch is brief and harmless, lasting only seconds before dissolving. Rather than a hidden message in sound, déjà entendu reflects how finely balanced our memory systems are, and how easily the brain can blur the line between something heard once and something heard before. Cryptomnesia. In 1976, former Beatle George Harrison released the song My Sweet Lord. Soon after, he was sued for copyright infringement because the melody was nearly identical to an earlier hit, He's So Fine by the Chiffons. Harrison swore the resemblance was unintentional. Psychologists had a word for what happened: cryptomnesia. Cryptomnesia occurs when a forgotten memory resurfaces, but without its original label. Instead of being recognized as something recalled, it feels like a brand new idea. Writers may invent a phrase they once read years ago, or a composer might unknowingly replicate a tune long buried in memory. To the creator, it feels authentic, but it isn't original. Cognitive research shows why this happens. Memory relies not only on storing information, but also on correctly tagging its source. In cryptomnesia, the content is retrieved, but the source tag fails. Experiments by psychologists Alan Brown and Dana Murphy in the 1980s demonstrated this effect. Participants asked to generate words later accidentally plagiarized from others in the group, convinced the ideas were their own. Historically, the phenomenon fueled suspicion. Authors accused of plagiarism sometimes faced ruined reputations, even when the resemblance was unconscious. In spiritual traditions, Cryptomnesia was once mistaken for channeling, where individuals produced knowledge they believed came from outside themselves, but may have been retrieved from forgotten experience. Today, neuroscientists see cryptomnesia as an ordinary memory glitch, not deception, but a system error in the brain's source monitoring process. What actually matters is that cryptomnesia shows how fragile originality can be. Even our most creative moments are built on memory, and sometimes the mind recycles old files without telling us. Eye floaters. A bright blue sky stretches overhead, and as you look up, faint shapes drift across your vision. Tiny threads, dots, or cobweb-like forms that slide when your eyes move. Try to focus on them and they dart away. These are eye floaters, one of the most common visual glitches. Almost everyone experiences them at some point, especially when staring at a clear background like a white wall or cloudless sky. For centuries, people puzzled over these mysterious shapes. In medieval texts, they were sometimes described as flying flies or even spiritual visions. Some believed they were omens, signs from the divine, or evidence of hidden life forms. Modern science provides a clearer explanation. Inside the eye, the vitreous, a gel-like substance that fills the space between lens and retina, gradually changes with age. Tiny clumps of collagen or cellular debris form and cast shadows on the retina. What you perceive as drifting shapes are actually those shadows projected onto your field of vision. Ophthalmologists can observe them directly during eye exams, confirming their physical origin. Research shows that floaters are generally harmless, though sudden bursts of them may signal retinal detachment and require medical attention. For most people, they remain an occasional nuisance, visual static that fades into the background when the brain adapts. What makes floaters feel uncanny is how they expose the mechanics of sight itself. The eye isn't a perfect lens feeding reality directly. It's an organ with imperfections, and those imperfections sometimes render their own images. The fact to remember is that eye floaters are not external objects or hidden creatures, but shadows inside the eye. Tiny reminders that even vision itself can glitch. Mandela Effect. Crowds of people remember details that never existed. A monocle on the Monopoly Man, a black tip on Pikachu's tail, or the spelling Berenstain Bears instead of Berenstain. The confidence in these memories is strong, yet none of them match reality. This puzzling glitch in recollection is known as the Mandela Effect. The name comes from one of the most famous examples. In the 2000s, thousands online claimed they clearly remembered Nelson Mandela dying in a South African prison during the 1980s. They spoke of televised funerals, mourning speeches, and even lessons in school. But Mandela lived until 2013. The gap between memory and fact was striking enough to define the entire phenomenon. Psychologists explain that memory does not work like a recording. Each recollection is reconstructed, pulling fragments from different sources. Cultural associations, assumptions, and even suggestions from others can slip in unnoticed. When these errors are repeated across a group, they can spread into shared certainty. Research published in 2016 showed just how quickly collective false memories can take root when people are exposed to subtle cues. Throughout history, people have searched for deeper meaning in such errors. Folklore often cast them as supernatural signs, while in modern culture, they've been linked to theories of alternate realities or parallel timelines. These interpretations resonate because the feeling of a false memory is nearly identical to the feeling of a real one. The Mandela Effect doesn't reveal cracks in reality. It highlights how easily our minds weave convincing stories from imperfect recollections, reminders that certainty itself can be unreliable. Bader Meinhof. You learn a new word one morning, and by evening it seems to be everywhere, in headlines, on social media, even in casual conversation. What felt invisible before now stands out sharply, as if the world has been subtly altered. This is the frequency illusion, often called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. The glitch begins when something captures attention. A word, a product, a number, or a symbol. From that moment, it appears to show up with unusual frequency. To the person experiencing it, the effect feels uncanny, almost as though reality itself has shifted to match their focus. Cognitive science explains it as the interaction of two processes. The first is selective attention. Once the brain tags something as meaningful, it begins noticing it more readily, filtering out other details. The second is confirmation bias. Every new sighting strengthens the impression that the item is everywhere, while the many times it isn't present go unnoticed. A 2008 study on language learning showed how dramatically people overestimate the presence of newly learned words, illustrating how quickly perception adapts. The term Bader-Meinhof was coined in the 1990s after a newspaper reader encountered the name of the German terrorist group twice in short succession. Believing it had suddenly become more common, he gave a lasting label to what was really just the illusion at work. Historically, recurring encounters with numbers, names, or symbols were often treated as omens or signs of destiny. Modern science reframes them as artifacts of attention, not proof of hidden messages. In the end, the phenomenon is less about the world multiplying and more about perception narrowing. Afterimage. A child stares at a bright lamp, then quickly shuts their eyes. Against the darkness, the glowing shape remains, lingering for seconds before fading. This lingering imprint is known as an afterimage. Afterimages occur when the cells in the retina, rods and cones, become overstimulated by light. These photoreceptors adapt to strong stimulation, and when the gaze shifts away, the fatigued cells keep firing unevenly. The result is a ghostly copy of what was just seen, projected into the visual field, even though the object is gone. There are two main types. Positive afterimages preserve the brightness and colours of the original scene, while negative afterimages reverse them. A red square leaves a green imprint. A bright light leaves a dark spot. This effect was carefully studied as early as the 18th century, when scientists like Johann Goethe and later Hermann von Helmholtz used afterimages to explore how vision and colour perception work. Cultural interpretations were often less scientific. In some traditions, lingering lights seen after staring at the sun were taken as mystical visions or signs from the divine. Artists have long used the concept of afterimages to play with colour theory, knowing that the eye itself will generate complementary hues to balance what it has been exposed to. Modern research confirms that afterimages highlight a basic truth about vision. We don't see the world directly. The brain constantly adjusts for overstimulation, filling gaps and rebalancing signals. What feels like an external ghost of light is really the eye's system resetting itself. The fact to remember is that afterimages aren't messages from outside reality. They are a simple glitch in the machinery of sight, proof that even vision carries echoes of what just passed. Mind pops. You're washing dishes when a song lyric from years ago suddenly bursts into your mind. No radio, no trigger, no clear reason, just a line looping in your head. These sudden intrusions are known as mind pops. Mind pops are fragments of memory, words, images, or sounds that surface spontaneously, disconnected from the present moment. A single childhood phrase, a jingle, or the face of an actor may appear without warning. Psychologists note that almost everyone experiences them, often daily, though most people dismiss them as meaningless mental noise. Cognitive science offers a clear explanation. Memory is not a perfectly ordered archive. It's a network of associations. Neurons constantly fire in patterns, and sometimes a fragment of that network activates on its own. In a 2010 study from the University of Hertfordshire, researchers found that people who experienced frequent mind pops also tended to show stronger creative thinking, suggesting that these glitches are linked to the brain's background search functions. Historically, sudden mental intrusions were interpreted differently. In ancient cultures, unexpected words or images were sometimes seen as omens or messages from the spirit world. In literature, authors have used them to capture the strange, involuntary pull of memory, moments when the past intrudes into the present without invitation. Modern neuroscience reframes them as harmless noise in the system. The brain's constant scanning for associations occasionally throws up random results, like an error message that doesn't belong to what you're doing. They are fleeting, unprovoked, and often forgotten as quickly as they appear. What actually matters is that mind pops reveal how active memory is, even when you're not thinking about it. The brain is always searching, and sometimes it delivers fragments you never asked for. Sleepwalking, midnight streets have sometimes been crossed by people who are not awake. Eyes half open, movements deliberate, yet the mind completely absent. By morning, there is no memory of the journey. This strange state is known as sleepwalking, one of the most vivid glitches between sleeping and waking. Sleepwalking, or somnambulism, takes place during deep non-REM sleep. At that stage, much of the brain is inactive, but motor pathways remain active enough to control the body. Instead of lying still, the sleeper may rise, walk, move objects, eat food, or in rare situations, attempt complex tasks. Because reasoning and memory systems stay offline, the episode usually vanishes from awareness by the next day. Research shows that sleepwalking runs in families and appears most often in childhood, though it can persist into adulthood. Stress, fatigue, and irregular sleep schedules all increase the likelihood. A 2012 neurology study reported that nearly 30% of adults had experienced it at least once, making it far more common than many assume. Older interpretations gave it mystical weight. In medieval Europe, sleepwalkers were thought to be guided by spirits, or their souls said to be wandering outside the body. Literature has often used it as a symbol of hidden conflict, with Lady Macbeth's nocturnal pacing offering one of the most famous examples. Today, science views it instead as a disorder of arousal, when the brain becomes trapped between incompatible states. Most sleepwalking is harmless, though it can be risky if the sleeper enters unsafe environments. The enduring unease of sleepwalking lies in its contradiction. A body that looks awake, a mind that is not. A reminder that consciousness is not as seamless as it feels. Hypnagogia. Lying in bed, a man begins to fade towards sleep. Out of nowhere, he hears a knock on the door, then sees a flash of colours behind his eyelids. Startled, he opens his eyes. The room is silent, the door untouched. What he experienced was hypnagogia, the strange borderland between waking and dreaming. Hypnagogia is the transitional state that occurs as the brain shifts into sleep. In this moment, perception becomes unstable. People report hearing phantom voices, seeing vivid patterns, or feeling as though they're floating outside their body. Unlike dreams, which unfold once sleep is established, hypnagogic experiences intrude while awareness is still present. Neuroscience links the phenomenon to the shift in brainwave activity. As alpha waves give way to slower theta rhythms, sensory and memory circuits fire unpredictably, creating brief hallucinations. A 2018 study in Nature Neuroscience demonstrated that participants held in this stage showed enhanced creativity, suggesting that hypnagogia taps into the brain's ability to forge new connections. Historically, such visions were often treated as meaningful. In Greek philosophy, these fleeting images were described as messages from the divine. Medieval texts sometimes interpreted them as glimpses of the spirit world, while in other traditions they were seen as omens or warnings. Today, researchers see them as a byproduct of the brain's powering down process, a system not yet asleep, but no longer fully awake. For some, hypnagogia is harmless and even inspiring. For others, especially when paired with sleep paralysis, it can be frightening, filled with shadowy figures or unsettling sounds. What actually matters is that hypnagogia is not a portal to another reality, but a glitch in the sleep cycle. A vivid reminder that consciousness is less stable than it seems. Phantom limb sensation. A soldier loses his arm in battle, yet weeks later he insists his hand still itches. Another patient describes clenching a fist that no longer exists, the nails digging painfully into a palm that is gone. These uncanny experiences are called phantom limb sensations. Phantom sensations affect the majority of amputees. Studies suggest up to 80% experience them. The missing limb feels present, sometimes neutral, sometimes unbearably painful. Patients may describe tingling, warmth, cold, or pressure in a body part that is no longer there. Neuroscience explains it through the brain's body map. In the somatosensory cortex, each region of the body has a corresponding area of representation. When a limb is removed, the map does not instantly erase it. Neighboring regions begin to invade, producing sensations that the brain still interprets as coming from the absent limb. In the 1990s, neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran demonstrated this with mirror box therapy, tricking the brain into seeing the missing limb move, which sometimes reduced phantom pain. Historically, phantom limbs were seen as evidence of the soul or spirit body. In the 16th century, French surgeon Ambroise Paré recorded accounts of amputees tormented by pain in their lost limbs, fueling speculation that the body retained an invisible double. Today, science frames it less mystically, but no less strangely. The mind's representation of the body lags behind physical reality. Phantom limb sensations can fade with time, though some persist for decades. What makes them remarkable is how vividly they show that perception is not tied strictly to the body, but to the brain's internal model of it. The fact to remember is that phantom limbs reveal a deeper truth. Even when reality changes, the brain's map of the body can glitch and refuse to update. Out-of-body experience. In moments of crisis or deep unconsciousness, some people report a startling shift. Their perspective seems to rise, and the body below looks like it belongs to someone else. doctors moving in an operating room, a car accident unfolding on the street. The scene is visible, but from outside the self. These are out-of-body experiences. Studies suggest that about 1 in 10 people encounter such episodes at least once. They are most often linked to trauma, anesthesia, seizures, or sleep transitions. The sensation is not vague, but strikingly vivid. A clear relocation of viewpoint, as if awareness has slipped its physical tether. Neuroscience explains the effect through the brain's body mapping systems. Normally, information from balance, vision, and touch is blended seamlessly to produce a single perspective rooted in the body. But if those streams fall out of sync, the integration can fracture. In 2002, researchers demonstrated this by electrically stimulating the temporoparietal junction in patients, reliably producing out-of-body sensations. Across cultures, the experience has long been framed as evidence of something beyond biology. Religious texts and mystical traditions described it as the soul departing. Near-death testimonies gave it symbolic weight as a passage between worlds. While those interpretations remain influential, modern science places the phenomenon within the brain itself, a perceptual error rather than proof of transcendence. The impact, however, is undeniable. Some describe fear and disorientation, others a profound sense of calm or perspective. Out-of-body experiences remind us that even the simple act of knowing where we are is a construction. When that construction falters, the self can feel detached, not because it has left the body, but because the brain's map of reality has shifted. Sleep identity confusion. A woman wakes in the middle of the night, sits up in bed, and for several minutes cannot recall who she is. She recognizes the room, the clock, the furniture, but not her own identity. Panic sets in before, just as suddenly, her sense of self returns. This rare but unsettling episode is called sleep identity confusion. The phenomenon occurs when the transition from sleep to wakefulness is disrupted. During normal waking, the brain quickly reassembles orientation, where you are, what time it is, and who you are. But in sleep identity confusion, that process lags. For a brief period, autobiographical memory and self-recognition fail to load, leaving the person conscious but unmoored. Sleep researchers have documented it most often in people with irregular sleep schedules, exhaustion, or underlying sleep disorders. A 1991 study in the journal Sleep described multiple cases of patients waking without awareness of their own names or relationships, sometimes lasting several minutes. Though alarming, the episodes typically resolve on their own without lasting harm. Historically, such experiences were interpreted as possession, temporary madness, or evidence of the soul wandering during the night. In some cultures, waking without memory of self was seen as punishment for disturbing spirits. Modern neuroscience frames it differently, as a glitch in the reactivation of the default mode network, the set of brain regions responsible for maintaining self-awareness. While rare, sleep identity confusion highlights how fragile the sense of self can be. The continuity of identity, something most people assume is constant, depends on brain systems that can, under strain, briefly fail. What actually matters is that sleep identity confusion isn't a sign of lost sanity, but a temporary misfire in memory and awareness, a reminder that even the self can glitch. Attentional blink. In experiments on attention, timing can be everything. When information is presented in rapid succession, the first item often gets through, but the second vanishes, not because the eyes failed, but because awareness momentarily shut its gate. Psychologists call this brief gap attentional blink. The effect reflects a simple truth. Attention has strict limits. When a significant stimulus appears, the brain invests resources in processing it. For a short period, usually a few hundred milliseconds, new information is less likely to reach conscious awareness. The brain doesn't stop seeing. It just stops reporting. Research in the early 1990s first captured the phenomenon in controlled lab tasks using streams of letters and numbers. Later, brain imaging revealed the mechanism. Sensory regions still respond to the missed stimulus, but higher-level areas that bring perception into awareness remain quiet. The signal arrives, yet it never gets promoted to memory. This isn't just an artifact of lab conditions. In daily life, the same effect plays out when a driver focusing on one hazard overlooks a sign just ahead, or when a reader skips past a duplicated word without realizing it. The information was there, but awareness was busy elsewhere. Earlier eras often blamed such slips on laziness or distraction. Today, attentional blink demonstrates they are structural limits of perception itself. The lesson is that awareness isn't a smooth spotlight, but a flickering one, precise, powerful, yet prone to blink at the very moments we think we're paying attention. Déjà rêvé. Dreams often dissolve the moment we wake, leaving only fragments behind. But sometimes, much later, a real event feels like it was already lived in a dream. A phrase, a room, or an interaction clicks with uncanny force, as if the present is echoing sleep. This is déjà rêvé, the experience of already dreamed. Unlike déjà vu, which creates a hazy sense of familiarity, déjà rêvé is tied specifically to dream recall. People who experience it often report striking detail. The exact words spoken, the setting, even the timing feels like a dream repeating itself. Though less common than déjà vu, its impact can be stronger, leaving the impression that dreams foretold waking life. Neuroscience has traced it in patients with epilepsy. A 2010 study in epilepsy and behavior found that stimulating the temporal lobe sometimes induced déjà rêvé episodes, suggesting that dream memories can resurface and be misclassified during waking experience. Instead of recognizing a lived event, the brain tags the present as something remembered from sleep. For centuries, the effect was seen as prophetic. Many cultures viewed dreams as glimpses of the future, and déjà rêvé seemed like confirmation. Writers, too, have used it to blur the line between inner imagination and external reality, capturing the eerie sense of life bending back into dream. Déjà rêvé illustrates that the brain doesn't always keep its memory systems cleanly divided. Most dream fragments vanish, but when one slips back into waking life at just the right moment, it creates the illusion of prophecy, a glitch where memory and dream briefly trade places. Telescoping effect. Ask someone when Michael Jackson died, and they might say a few years ago, even though it was 2009. Or they might recall the Challenger disaster as happening more recently than it did. This distortion of time is called the telescoping effect. The glitch occurs when memories of past events are pulled closer to the present than they really are. Psychologists describe two types: forward telescoping, where older events are remembered as more recent, and backward telescoping, where newer events are misremembered as further in the past. Either way, the timeline collapses, leaving people convinced that events happened at the wrong distance in time. Scientific studies confirm how widespread it is. In a 1980s survey, people consistently misdated news events, often compressing decades into just a few years ago. Later research showed that emotional intensity, personal relevance, and cultural importance all make memories more prone to telescoping. The brain appears to store vivid details without accurately tagging their dates, leaving recall vulnerable to distortion. Historically, this glitch has shaped collective memory. Generations often condense decades of history, recalling wars, political movements, or cultural shifts as if they happened closer together than they did. Oral histories sometimes blend timelines, creating the impression that separate events occurred almost simultaneously. Neuroscience suggests the cause lies in how episodic memory is reconstructed. Rather than pulling from a fixed archive, the brain rebuilds the past using fragments. Without precise timestamps, events are placed where they feel they belong, usually closer to now. What actually matters is that the telescoping effect doesn't mean the events themselves are fading. The details remain, but the brain glitches when placing them on the timeline, compressing history until yesterday and decades ago blur together. Confabulation. In the 1880s, Russian neurologist Sergei Korsakov treated patients with severe memory loss. When asked about their day, some confidently described conversations or activities that had never happened. These fabrications weren't lies. The patients truly believed them. This strange error is called confabulation. Confabulation occurs when the brain fills gaps in memory with invented details. Unlike ordinary forgetting, the person isn't aware of the inaccuracy. They may recall visiting a place they've never been, or insist an event unfolded in a way that records prove false. The stories can be simple errors or elaborate narratives, but to the individual, they feel real. Neuroscience links the phenomenon to damage in the frontal lobes and memory circuits, often from conditions like Korsakoff syndrome, stroke, or traumatic brain injury. These brain regions are crucial for monitoring the accuracy of recall. When they malfunction, the error-checking system fails, and the brain generates content to keep the story coherent. A 2007 study in brain showed that confabulation often arises not from missing memory itself, but from the inability to suppress irrelevant or false information. Historically, these errors were sometimes mistaken for delusion or intentional deceit. Yet careful study revealed that patients weren't inventing stories to mislead. They were unknowingly constructing reality out of fragments. In everyday life, milder forms appear too. People confidently misremember where they placed objects or reconstruct events with details borrowed from elsewhere. What makes confabulation unsettling is how seamless it feels. The brain doesn't leave blanks. It patches them automatically, and the patch can be indistinguishable from truth. The fact to remember is that confabulation shows memory is less about storing the past and more about storytelling, a system prone to glitches that rewrite reality without our awareness. Random chills. Without warning, the skin can bristle. A ripple of goosebumps spreads down the arms or across the back, and then it vanishes, leaving no obvious cause. These fleeting sensations are known as random chills or spontaneous shivers. Unlike shivers from cold or fever, these episodes occur in comfortable conditions, often while someone is sitting still or walking indoors. The body reacts as if startled, though nothing in the environment explains the response. Research links the effect to the autonomic nervous system, which regulates involuntary functions such as heart rate, blood pressure, and temperature. Small disruptions in this system can briefly activate the same pathways used for cold defense, producing muscle tremors and goosebumps. A 2008 study in clinical autonomic research suggested that microbursts of adrenaline may also play a role. the same hormone that primes the body to fight or flee. Cultural explanations have long filled the gap left by science. In parts of Europe, a sudden shiver was said to mean someone had stepped over your future grave. Elsewhere, it was seen as a sign of unseen spirits nearby. These interpretations reveal how people turned unexplained bodily signals into symbols of fate or the supernatural. Modern science takes a simpler view. Random chills may reflect hidden shifts in mood, subtle stress responses, or background fluctuations in the nervous system. They are benign, but they highlight how the body can generate signals that feel meaningful even when nothing external has changed. The real significance of random chills lies in what they show about perception. Our bodies can produce sensations that feel like warnings, yet are only echoes of the nervous system itself. Phosphene. Close your eyes, and the world doesn't always go dark. With a little pressure, or even in moments of fatigue, bursts of light can appear, swirling shapes, flickers, or radiant sparks. These inner visuals are known as phosphenes. Phosphenes occur when the visual system is activated without light. Pressure on the eye, sudden shifts in blood flow, or even electrical activity in the brain can stimulate the retina or the visual cortex, producing the impression of brightness. Many people first discover them in childhood, noticing strange patterns while rubbing their eyes before sleep. The phenomenon has intrigued scientists for centuries. In the 1600s, Edmé Mariotte documented how pressing on the eye could create luminous impressions. Today, neuroscience shows that even direct electrical stimulation of the visual cortex during surgery can produce phosphenes, ranging from simple flashes to more complex geometric forms. A 2019 study in Frontiers in Neuroscience even explored their potential in vision restoration, using induced phosphenes to help blind participants perceive patterned light. Cultural interpretations once gave them mystical weight. Ancient philosophers wrote about inner lights as signs of spiritual insight, while meditation traditions sometimes described them as glimpses of hidden truths. Their spontaneous appearance, especially in silence or darkness, made them feel like something beyond the body. Modern science instead sees them as evidence of the visual system's sensitivity. Even in complete darkness, the brain remains active, and small disruptions can be mistaken for external light. Phosphenes remind us that vision isn't a passive recording of the outside world. It's an active construction. The sparks behind closed eyes show that the brain can generate light entirely on its own. Paresthesia. In the quiet stillness of night, a sudden rush of tingling spreads through a limb. The arm feels heavy, distant, almost alien, as though it belongs to someone else. Within minutes, the sensation ebbs away, leaving only relief and curiosity. This fleeting but unmistakable episode is paresthesia, commonly known as pins and needles. Paresthesia occurs when nerves are disrupted, most often by compression. Crossing the legs too long, sleeping on an arm, or pressing awkwardly on a hand can restrict blood flow and apply pressure to peripheral nerves. Once the pressure is lifted, those nerves react unpredictably. Instead of a smooth return of sensation, they fire in bursts, which the brain translates as sharp tingling or prickling. Neurologists describe this as the nervous system resetting itself. Peripheral nerves, the ones outside the brain and spinal cord, are especially vulnerable. A 2005 study in neurology documented how even mild compression can lead to these short-lived sensory distortions, a reminder of how delicate the body's signaling network really is. For centuries, before nerves were mapped, paresthesia invited symbolic explanations. In ancient Greece, tingling limbs were thought to mark the touch of unseen spirits. In folklore, a tingling palm could mean money was on its way or slipping through one's grasp. The universality of the experience meant nearly every culture gave it meaning beyond the physical. Most of the time, paresthesia is harmless, though persistent or unexplained episodes can point to conditions like diabetes or nerve injury. For the vast majority, however, it is nothing more than an everyday sensory glitch. Pins and needles show that even the simplest act of feeling is fragile, a brief reminder that our connection to the body relies on signals that can falter, scramble, and then recover. Earworm. Late at night, silence fills the room. Yet in the quiet, a tune rises unbidden, a chorus from a song you haven't heard in days, repeating on a loop. No radio, no headphones, just the brain playing DJ without permission. This is the earworm. Also called involuntary musical imagery, earworms are nearly universal. More than 90% of people report experiencing them, sometimes daily. They're rarely full songs. Most often a fragment, like the hook or chorus, looping with uncanny persistence. Neuroscience has mapped part of the mechanism. The auditory cortex, which processes sound, remains active even when no music is present. Catchy or incomplete melodies exploit the brain's predictive system, which seeks to resolve unfinished patterns. A 2012 study in consciousness and cognition confirmed that songs with repetitive structure or unusual intervals are especially prone to becoming stuck. Conditions like stress, fatigue, or idle activities such as commuting or showering provide the mental space for these loops to surface. Historically, the experience was described in more colourful ways. German writers coined the term Ohrwurm in the 19th century, comparing it to a worm burrowing into the ear. Some folk traditions treated repetitive songs as charms or curses, sound given a kind of invasive power. Though often annoying, earworms are not harmful. Strategies to dislodge them range from finishing the song in full to distracting the mind with another task or tune. Usually, though, they fade on their own. Earworms reveal that memory doesn't simply archive the past, it can reanimate it, sometimes without invitation. In these moments, the brain reminds us it has its own soundtrack, playing on a loop until it decides to let go. The stair misstep, the familiar rhythm of walking downstairs, can suddenly collapse into shock. One step feels wrong, the ground is too close or too far, and the body lurches in a moment of misplaced trust. This is the stair misstep, a small but startling glitch in movement. The effect comes from the brain's reliance on prediction. When moving down a staircase, the motor system builds a mental model of timing and distance. Each step confirms the rhythm until one fails to match. If the staircase ends earlier than expected, or a single step is built higher or lower than the rest, the brain's plan misfires. Muscles are prepared for one outcome but meet another, creating the jolt. Scientists call this a breakdown of forward modeling, where the brain predicts sensory feedback before it arrives. Normally, the prediction and the actual sensation align seamlessly. But when they don't, the error is so abrupt that it triggers a startle reflex. Research published in Experimental Brain Research in 2005 documented how these mismatches can spark adrenaline surges, which explains why the misstep feels momentarily alarming despite no real danger. Historically, stumbles like this carried symbolic weight. Some traditions saw them as warnings, signs of bad luck, or even nudges from unseen spirits. Yet modern science shows they are nothing more than the cost of efficiency. A predictive system that works flawlessly most of the time but occasionally trips on its own shortcuts. The stair misstep is fleeting, but memorable. It highlights how much of daily life runs on prediction rather than conscious thought. When those predictions fail, even the simple act of stepping downward can remind us that control is never absolute. Familiar stranger phenomenon. Morning commutes are full of patterns, the same train cars, the same bus routes, the same faces passing in and out of view. Over time, one or two of those faces begin to stand out. You may not know their names, but they become part of the scenery, a fixture of daily life. This is the familiar stranger phenomenon. Social psychologist Stanley Milgram first described it in the 1970s. He noticed that in cities, people often share public spaces with the same individuals over and over without ever speaking to them. These strangers form an odd category, neither friends nor complete unknowns, but a kind of silent acquaintance. The illusion of recognition deepens when routine is broken. Spotting the same person in an unexpected place, a park, a shop, a different street, can feel momentarily disorienting, as though a background character has stepped into the foreground. The psychology behind it is straightforward. Human brains are tuned to remember faces through repetition, even when no details are attached. Studies in cognitive science show that repeated brief exposure is enough to encode a sense of familiarity, even if the context is forgotten. But because these recognitions lack personal information, the connection feels shallow, leaving a gap between familiarity and knowledge. Cultural interpretations once gave such figures symbolic weight. Folklore framed recurring strangers as omens, guardians, or spirits. In modern life, they make up what sociologists call invisible communities, the unspoken ties that form in shared routines. The familiar stranger is a quiet reminder of how social memory works. Our minds notice patterns even when we don't intend to, turning strangers into subtle fixtures of our world. Proof that connection doesn't always require conversation. Doorway effect. You walk with purpose toward another room, thought sharp in your mind, and then it's gone. By the time you've crossed the doorway, the reason for moving has vanished. This sudden blanking is known as the doorway effect. Psychologist Gabriel Radvansky and colleagues at the University of Notre Dame explored this in 2011 through controlled experiments. They found that participants who passed through a doorway were significantly more likely to forget what they were doing compared to those who travelled the same distance without changing rooms. The simple act of crossing a boundary seemed to disrupt memory. Cognitive science points to event boundaries as the cause. The brain doesn't treat experience as a continuous flow, but as a sequence of episodes, like chapters in a story. A doorway marks the end of one scene and the start of another. In that transition, working memory is partially reset, which can sometimes erase the very intention guiding the movement. It's an efficient system most of the time, preventing overload by clearing space for new input, but it comes at the cost of occasional lapses. Cultural interpretations once chalked such slips up to distraction or aging. More recently, experiments in both real-world and virtual spaces confirmed that the effect isn't about the walls themselves, but about the brain's sense of shifting context. What feels like forgetfulness is actually a structural feature of memory design. For most people, the thought reappears after a pause or by walking back into the original room. Yet the experience is striking, because it reveals how our minds carve the world into scenes. Crossing a threshold doesn't just move the body, it redraws the map of memory. Mondegreen, crowded concerts, muffled radios, or old recordings. These are perfect conditions for a peculiar auditory glitch. A lyric rings out, But what the listener hears isn't what was sung. Instead, words bend into strange new forms, sometimes so convincing that they replace the original. This is the mondegreen. The word was introduced in 1954 by writer Sylvia Wright. As a child, she misheard the line of a Scottish ballad and laid him on the green as "and Lady Mondegreen." Her childhood error became the label for an entire category of misheard phrases that persist across generations. Cognitive science explains why this happens. Unlike written text, speech and song arrive as a continuous stream without clear breaks. The auditory system relies on context, expectation, and memory to carve that stream into words. When sound is distorted by speed, accent, or background noise, the brain fills gaps with its best guess. Once that guess clicks, it feels solid, even if it's completely wrong. A 2014 study in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience found that prior expectations strongly shape auditory perception, showing that mishearing is built into the mechanics of listening. Culturally, mondegreens have left their mark everywhere. Hymns, folk songs, and pop hits all have their unofficial versions, carried forward by confident voices. Sometimes the mistaken lyric is funnier or more memorable than the real one, embedding itself into collective memory as though it were deliberate. Mondegreens reveal something deeper than humour. They remind us that hearing is never a simple act of reception. It is interpretation, built moment by moment. And in that space between sound and meaning, entire new versions of reality can emerge. Semantic satiation. Say a word enough times, and it begins to unravel. What once carried meaning now sounds hollow, mechanical, almost alien. The mind recognizes the syllables, but loses the concept attached. This is semantic satiation. Psychologist Leon Akobovitz. James first studied the effect in the 1960s. He demonstrated that repeating a word quickly can momentarily strip it of meaning. The reason lies in how the brain links sound to concept. Repeated activation of the same neural pathways causes them to fatigue. For a short while, the signal weakens and the word becomes noise. Modern neuroscience supports this explanation. Imaging studies show that regions of the brain critical for language, especially the left temporal lobe and prefrontal cortex, dampen their activity during rapid repetition. A 2011 study in Brain and Language confirmed that this isn't simply boredom or distraction. It's a form of neural adaptation, similar to how a constant smell or background sound fades into nothing. Long before psychology gave it a name, the effect was noticed in practice. Many religious and meditative traditions use chanting not only for rhythm or ritual, but because repetition seemed to detach language from its ordinary meaning. A word repeated enough times ceased to point outward and instead became a sound to focus inward. For most of us, semantic satiation appears as a fleeting curiosity, a word gone strange in the middle of repetition. Yet it points to something profound. Words don't hold meaning on their own. Meaning is rebuilt every time we use them, and repetition can momentarily break the bridge, leaving us face to face with the raw sound beneath. Glitch in the matrix coincidences. Two strangers sit across from each other on a train, both wearing the same jacket, reading the same book, and drinking from identical cups. Neither planned it, but to the observer it feels like reality stuttered, as if two frames of life were copied and pasted. These are often called glitch in the matrix coincidences. The phrase took off after the 1999 film, where Déjà Vu signaled a reset in a simulated world. Online forums are now filled with reports, strangers repeating the same line in unison, numbers and dates appearing too neatly. events lining up in improbable ways. For the person experiencing it, the effect is unsettling, like the world briefly revealed it's running on code. Mathematicians explain it more soberly. Coincidences are not as rare as they feel. With enough people and enough events, overlaps become inevitable. The birthday paradox illustrates this. In a room of just 23 people, there's a 50% chance 2 will share the same birthday. Extend that principle to billions of daily actions, and what looks like a glitch is often just probability playing out. Psychology adds another layer. The brain is primed to notice patterns that carry emotional weight, while ignoring the ocean of moments that don't align. This attentional bias means one striking overlap feels extraordinary, even though statistically, it was bound to happen eventually. What actually matters is that glitch in the matrix coincidences reveal both sides of perception, the raw mathematics of chance, and the mind's deep need to stitch chance into story. The overlap is real, but the glitch is how we interpret it. Call of ghost tinnitus. In a quiet room, silence can seem alive. A faint voice slips through it, your own name, spoken clearly, though no one is near. Startled, you turn, only to find the air empty. This fleeting illusion is sometimes called call of ghost tinnitus. Unlike classic tinnitus, which produces ringing or buzzing, this glitch mimics speech. Most often, it is a single word, the name most tied to self. Surveys show that many people report the experience at least once, especially during fatigue, stress, or solitude. Neuroscience explains it as a false alarm in the auditory system. The brain constantly monitors for meaningful cues, and few are more important than the sound of one's own name. This sensitivity is so strong that it occasionally produces phantom signals. Research published in Brain Research in 2015 suggests the effect combines overactive auditory processing with predictive coding, the mind anticipating the call and generating it internally. Across cultures, hearing a disembodied voice carried deeper interpretations. Folklore often treated it as a sign of spirits nearby, or as a premonition. In religious contexts, the unseen call was sometimes framed as divine. Such readings persist because the experience feels personal, intimate, and hard to dismiss. Clinically, occasional episodes are harmless. Only in extreme stress, prolonged sleep loss, or neurological conditions do phantom voices become concerning. For most, the event passes in a moment, unsettling, but ordinary. The call of ghost tinnitus shows how perception is shaped not only by sound from the outside world, but by expectation within. Even silence can be bent into meaning when the brain is primed to hear what matters most. Microsleep. Head resting on a hand, eyes open, words on a page begin to blur. A moment later, focus returns. But a few lines are gone, skipped without awareness. This fleeting blackout is called microsleep. Microsleeps are tiny episodes where the brain slips into sleep for 1 to 10 seconds, often without closing the eyes. They strike during monotonous activities like reading, highway driving, or staring at a screen. To the person experiencing it, time seems continuous, but fragments of awareness are missing. Sleep science shows that microsleeps emerge when the body is severely fatigued, but still pushed to stay awake. In this state, some neural circuits shut down while others remain active, creating patches of sleep inside an otherwise awake brain. A 2011 study in the Journal of Neuroscience recorded neurons in attention-related regions going temporarily silent during microsleep episodes, even as the rest of the brain stayed online. For centuries, sudden lapses into sleep were viewed as carelessness or moral failure. Today, research reframes them as an unavoidable consequence of sleep debt. No amount of determination can override the brain's basic need for rest. When pushed past its limits, it takes micro-rests automatically. These glitches are harmless in quiet settings, but dangerous in contexts requiring constant attention. Entire traffic accidents and industrial errors have been traced to unnoticed seconds of microsleep. What makes them risky is their invisibility. The person often doesn't realize it happened until after. Microsleep demonstrates that wakefulness isn't a steady state, but a fragile balance. When fatigue builds, the brain carves out rest in stolen fragments, reminding us that sleep is not optional, but enforced by biology. Chronostasis. You glance at a clock, and for a moment the second hand seems frozen. Then it jerks forward, as if time itself briefly stalled. This illusion is known as chronostasis. Chronostasis occurs when the brain edits perception during rapid eye movements, called saccades. Each time your eyes jump from one point to another, vision briefly shuts down to prevent motion blur. To keep experience seamless, the brain fills that gap by stretching the first stable image it sees, such as a clock's second hand. The result is a stopped moment, even though time never paused. Neuroscientists confirmed the effect in the late 1990s. In one experiment, participants looked at a ticking clock after shifting their gaze. Many reported that the first second lasted longer than those that followed. Brain imaging studies show that the prefrontal cortex helps stitch together these gaps, creating a continuous sense of time, while quietly rewriting what you experienced. Historically, people who noticed the frozen second sometimes interpreted it as evidence that time itself could falter. Accounts in diaries and literature described clocks hesitating or moments slipping, long before science uncovered the mechanics of eye movement. The glitch gave rise to musings about fate, destiny, or even supernatural interference. Chronostasis doesn't only affect clocks. It can appear whenever your eyes move suddenly, glancing at a phone screen, looking at a friend's face, or shifting across a room. Anywhere perception resets, the first moment can feel longer than it really is. What actually matters is that chronostasis isn't time-bending, but perception lagging. A glitch where the brain edits vision to hide its blind spots, leaving behind the eerie impression that the world itself stopped. Motion-induced blindness. On a busy road, headlights streak past and trees blur along the edges. In the midst of this constant motion, something still can simply disappear. A speck on the glass or a fixed road sign fades from awareness, only to return moments later. This is motion-induced blindness. Psychologists first demonstrated the effect in 1991. In experiments, participants were asked to focus on a stationary dot while surrounded by rotating patterns. Within seconds, the dot vanished from conscious perception, though it remained physically present. The eyes were still detecting it. The brain was not. The explanation lies in how vision prioritizes change. Human survival has long depended on detecting motion, so neural pathways are tuned to highlight movement over stability. When the scene is saturated with shifting patterns, the brain sometimes suppresses static details, effectively filtering them out. A 2008 Nature neuroscience study confirmed that during these episodes, early visual regions still registered the missing objects, but higher cortical areas failed to bring them into awareness. Pilots in World War II informally described similar lapses, reporting that stationary aircraft or ground targets could vanish against dynamic backgrounds. Even earlier, philosophers noted that attention can distort reality. making perception an unreliable mirror of the world. Outside the lab, the effect explains why drivers sometimes miss a static sign while watching moving traffic, or why a motion-filled screen can obscure details sitting still. Motion-induced blindness is not the world erasing itself, but the brain reshaping what it lets through. In a reality crowded with movement, stability can slip away, reminding us that seeing is always a negotiation between input and attention. Visual snow. In complete darkness, vision should fall silent. Yet for some, the dark is never empty. Instead, countless tiny sparks drift across the field of view, as if the world were covered by a veil of static. This is visual snow. The phenomenon is described as a layer of fast-moving dots that overlays everything seen. For some, it's a faint shimmer noticed only in certain light conditions. For others, it's constant, filling every scene, sometimes joined by afterimages, halos, or trouble adjusting to dim light. Unlike floaters or momentary phosphenes, visual snow does not disappear when the eyes close or shift. It belongs to the act of seeing itself. Neurologists now classify it as a brain-based condition rather than an eye problem. Research published in Neurology in 2014 found evidence of hyperactivity in the visual cortex of those with visual snow, suggesting the brain is amplifying background signals into conscious perception. Instead of silence, the system produces noise, like an overloaded receiver. Historically, the descriptions were harder to pin down. Some spoke of dust in the air or shimmering mist, often dismissed as imagination or nervousness. Yet the consistency of reports across cultures and time shows the experience is real, even if its cause is not fully understood. While visual snow is often harmless, it can be intrusive, reshaping how people perceive the world around them. Links to migraines and other neurological factors have been suggested, but no single explanation accounts for every case. Visual snow highlights that vision is not a direct recording of the world, but a construction. Even when nothing is there, the brain can overlay its own static, a reminder that perception always carries a trace of its own interference. Palinopsia. Sometimes vision doesn't move on. An object disappears from sight, yet its outline lingers, trailing across the visual field as though reality itself has been copied and pasted. This phenomenon is called palinopsia. Palinopsia refers to afterimages that are more persistent and detailed than the ordinary fading imprint from a bright light. People describe shapes, patterns, or even full scenes that reappear moments after the original stimulus has gone. For some, the effect lasts seconds. For others, it recurs frequently, creating the impression of echoes layered into vision. Neurologically, palinopsia is traced to disruptions in the occipital lobe, the brain's visual processing hub. A 2011 study in headache linked the phenomenon to migraines, where overstimulated pathways may continue firing after the initial image has disappeared. Other cases have been observed with seizures, lesions, or certain medications. Imaging studies suggest the glitch arises when the brain fails to properly reset its visual buffer, allowing old information to bleed into new moments. Long before it was named, lingering visions appeared in cultural accounts. Mystical traditions sometimes frame them as glimpses into hidden layers of reality, while artists have drawn on the effect to depict motion, memory, or the surreal overlap of scenes. Though palinopsia is uncommon, it illustrates how perception relies on constant updating. Vision isn't a static camera feed, but an active reconstruction, one that occasionally struggles to clear the past before building the present. Palinopsia shows that even sight carries memory within it. And when that memory refuses to fade, the world itself can appear to repeat. Hypnopompic. The first seconds after waking can feel unstable. Shapes shift, sounds emerge, and for some, the room itself fills with a presence that isn't there. These fleeting visions are called hypnopompic hallucinations. Unlike dreams, which remain sealed inside sleep, hypnopompic experiences intrude into the waking state. They can appear as shadowy figures, flashes of light, whispered voices, or the uncanny sensation that someone else is nearby. Surveys suggest up to 12% of people encounter them at least once, often during disrupted or restless sleep. Neuroscience links the phenomenon to the mechanics of REM sleep. During REM, the brain creates vivid imagery and intense emotional experiences. Normally, this activity shuts down before we regain awareness. But if waking overlaps with REM, fragments of dream content can spill into perception. A 2005 study in sleep medicine showed that these episodes are more likely in people with narcolepsy, irregular sleep cycles, or high stress, all conditions that blur the boundary between dreaming and waking. For much of history, hypnopompic visions were explained through myth and folklore. In many cultures, they were taken as visits from spirits, demons, or ancestors. Because the experiences feel so real, they easily merged with stories of supernatural encounters, lending weight to traditions of night visitations. Today, they are recognized as natural consequences of how the brain transitions between states. They may be unsettling, but they are not pathological in most cases. Instead, they highlight the fragility of the waking threshold. Hypnopompic hallucinations remind us that waking isn't always clean or immediate. Sometimes the dream world clings to perception, casting shadows that dissolve only when consciousness fully steadies. Exploding dream transitions. In the middle of a dream, silence is broken by a sudden blast. It could be a gunshot, a slammed door, or an explosion so loud it shakes the dream apart. The sleeper jolts awake, heart pounding, only to discover the room is perfectly quiet. This is an exploding dream transition. Closely related to exploding head syndrome, this variation occurs inside the passage from dream to wakefulness. The noise isn't heard in the outside world, but generated by the brain itself, woven into the dream as its final moment before waking. Sleep science points to misfiring during REM transitions. Normally, brainstem mechanisms dampen sensory systems to keep dreams separate from waking reality. But if that process stutters, the auditory cortex can surge with phantom input, experienced as a deafening internal sound. A 2010 review in Sleep Medicine Reviews suggested these events reflect abrupt disruptions in how the brain regulates sensory gating at the boundary of REM sleep. Accounts of the phenomenon stretch back centuries. Writers described thunderclaps in the skull, or dreams broken by imagined cannon fire. In folklore, the blasts were often interpreted as supernatural warnings or spiritual assaults, amplifying the fear they inspired. Though dramatic, exploding dream transitions are not dangerous. They leave no physical harm, only the memory of sound so vivid it's hard to believe it never happened. These episodes reveal just how easily the brain can fabricate intensity, manufacturing noise powerful enough to wake itself. In the fragile handoff between dreaming and waking, the mind becomes both the stage and the detonator. Formication. A man sits quietly in bed and suddenly feels the sensation of ants crawling across his arm. He brushes at his skin, but there is nothing there. The feeling returns, prickling, writhing, as though tiny legs are marching over the flesh. This unsettling glitch is called formication. Formication is a specific type of paresthesia, a false sensory signal where the brain creates the illusion of insects crawling on or under the skin. The name comes from the Latin formica, meaning ant. Unlike a simple itch, formication is vivid, often described as unmistakably insect-like, sometimes accompanied by tingling or stinging. Neurologically, the phenomenon arises when nerve pathways misfire, sending signals to the brain that mimic the sensation of crawling. It can be triggered by fatigue, stress, menopause, vitamin deficiencies, or withdrawal from certain medications. A 2010 paper in Journal of Neurology noted that altered dopamine pathways, the same circuits involved in reward and movement, play a role in generating these phantom crawling sensations. Historically, formication was interpreted through darker lenses. In medieval times, people who reported insects crawling beneath the skin were thought to be cursed or tormented by spirits. Later, in the 19th century, doctors linked it to delirium tremens in patients withdrawing from alcohol, cementing its reputation as a frightening medical symptom. Today, most cases are temporary and benign, though chronic or severe episodes may signal underlying neurological conditions. For the majority, formication is a strange, disorienting reminder that the brain does not always wait for real input to create convincing sensations. The fact to remember is that formication isn't insects invading the body, but a glitch in sensory wiring, the nervous system fabricating crawling signals out of nothing. Sleep drunkenness. A woman's alarm goes off in the early morning. She reaches to silence it, but moves awkwardly, her hands fumbling as if uncoordinated. When her partner asks her a question, her reply is confused and out of place. For several minutes, she seems caught between two worlds, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. This state is called sleep drunkenness. Sleep drunkenness, also known as confusional arousal, is more than ordinary grogginess. During these episodes, people may feel disoriented, speak incoherently, or even perform tasks without memory of them afterward. Unlike a few seconds of sluggishness on waking, sleep drunkenness can last for minutes and leave a striking sense of confusion. Scientific studies suggest that the glitch occurs when the brain is forced out of deep, slow-wave sleep too abruptly. In this state, areas of the brain responsible for higher reasoning, especially the prefrontal cortex, remain partially asleep while other regions wake up. A 2014 study in neurology found that up to 15% of adults reported experiencing these episodes, often triggered by irregular sleep schedules, long naps, or chronic sleep deprivation. Historically, such behavior was misinterpreted. In some cultures, individuals who woke in a confused or combative state were thought to be possessed or bewitched. Medical writings from the 19th century described patients who seemed stupefied on waking, without understanding that the brain was simply caught mid-transition. Most cases are harmless, though the condition can be risky in situations that require immediate clarity, such as waking to an alarm while driving long hours or responding to emergencies. What actually matters is that sleep drunkenness isn't a sign of weakness or poor discipline. It's a glitch in the brain's state-switching process, where waking doesn't arrive all at once. Muscle twitching. A student sits quietly during an exam when her arm suddenly jerks, the pen skipping across the page. Nothing triggered it. No pain, no conscious effort. Just a tiny burst of movement out of nowhere. This spontaneous spasm is a simple but puzzling glitch. Muscle twitching. Known medically as fasciculations, These small contractions happen in nearly everyone. They may appear as eyelid flickers, finger jumps, or calf twitches after exercise. For most people, they come and go without warning, lasting only a few seconds. In everyday life, they feel meaningless. But to the nervous system, they're the product of a misfired signal. The underlying cause is straightforward. Muscles contract when motor neurons send electrical impulses. Occasionally, a single neuron fires on its own, either because of fatigue, stress, or electrolyte imbalance. That lone spark activates a bundle of muscle fibers, creating the visible twitch. Neurologists using electromyography have observed these microsignals in healthy volunteers, showing how common they are even outside of illness. Cultural interpretations often leaned on superstition. In parts of the world, a twitching eye was once said to predict visitors, luck, or bad news, depending on which eyelid moved. Today we recognize that it's not a prophecy, but a quirk of the body's wiring. Though usually harmless, twitches highlight the delicate balance of the nervous system. Stress, caffeine, or lack of sleep can make them more frequent, reminding us how closely the body mirrors daily strain. They are rarely signs of deeper problems, but they capture the unnerving feeling of the body acting on its own. What actually matters is that muscle twitches are not warnings or omens, just stray sparks in the wiring, small glitches in the constant dialogue between brain and muscle. Auditory Pareidolia, a faucet drips in a quiet kitchen. Beneath the steady rhythm, a listener suddenly swears they hear a voice. It isn't there, but the mind insists it is. This is auditory pareidolia. The phenomenon is the auditory twin of seeing faces in clouds. Random noise, from static, running water, or humming machines, is reinterpreted as structured sound. Words, music, or whispers. The brain's need for order reshapes chaos into meaning. Neuroscience shows why this happens. Auditory input is often incomplete, especially in noisy or ambiguous environments. Instead of waiting passively, the brain predicts. Memory and language circuits fill in the blanks, overlaying familiar patterns on raw sound. A 2017 neuroimage study found that brain scans during these false perceptions closely resembled those of people hearing actual speech. The illusion feels convincing because the same systems are at work. Culturally, the glitch has carried weight for centuries. Ancient stories spoke of rivers carrying voices, or winds that whispered messages from spirits. In sacred rituals, chants and echoes were sometimes believed to contain divine communication. What modern science calls error correction, earlier generations took as revelation. In daily life, auditory pareidolia is usually benign. A fleeting impression, sometimes amusing, sometimes eerie. But in stressful or isolating settings, the same mechanism can make imagined sounds feel hauntingly real, blurring the distinction between perception and invention. Rather than proving the world speaks through static, auditory pareidolia shows how insistently the brain searches for meaning, so insistently that it sometimes builds voices out of noise itself. Sudden jolt memory flash. Moments of imbalance can do more than trip the body. Sometimes they trip the mind. A stumble on a stair or the jolt before sleep can spark a memory flash so vivid it feels like the past has been spliced into the present. Psychologists call this the sudden jolt memory flash. The experience blends motion and recollection. The hippocampus, which handles memory retrieval, shares close ties with motor systems responsible for balance and reflex. When the body is suddenly shocked into action by a slip, a jerk, or a lurch, the wiring between these systems can briefly misfire. The result is a fragment of memory bursting into awareness, often irrelevant and disjointed, yet strangely precise. Long before neuroscience, cultures gave these jolts symbolic weight. In South American folklore, a sudden memory after a stumble was seen as the soul snapping back into place. In East Asian traditions, it was sometimes interpreted as a brush with ancestors, a reminder of lives already lived. These interpretations reveal how deeply people sense the intrusion of the past into the present. Research today takes a more mechanical view. Studies on sleep and startled movements suggest that unstable brain states make it easier for dormant memory fragments to surface. What feels like prophecy or haunting is often a side effect of motor circuits stirring the hippocampus into action. These flashes last only seconds, but they leave an odd residue. The feeling that memory is not entirely under conscious control. Rather than signs of destiny or messages from elsewhere, they are evidence of just how easily the body's smallest shocks can stir the mind's deepest archives. Time dilation in emergencies. You're behind the wheel when another car suddenly swerves into your lane. In that instant, the world seems to slow. The movement of the other vehicle, your hands gripping the steering wheel, even the sound of your own breath feels stretched, as if time itself has bent. Later, when you replay it in memory, the event feels much longer than it could possibly have been. This is the glitch known as time dilation in emergencies. Reports of this phenomenon go back centuries. Soldiers in battle describe bullets hanging in the air. Accident survivors recall being able to see every detail in what was only a split second. Across cultures, these accounts converge on a strange perception. In moments of mortal danger, time seems to lose its usual rhythm. Modern neuroscience provides one explanation. Research at Baylor College of Medicine found that when people believe their lives are at risk, the brain's amygdala, the center for threat detection, floods the system with adrenaline. This doesn't actually make time slow down. Instead, it causes the brain to encode far more information per second than usual. When those memories are later retrieved, the density of detail makes the event feel longer than it was. Other studies show that under stress, attention narrows to critical cues, like the trajectory of a car or the position of an attacker. Peripheral information fades, giving the impression of a slowed environment, when in fact it's the brain selectively boosting what matters most. Culturally, these moments are often described as stepping outside of normal life, a liminal state between survival and catastrophe. They can feel almost supernatural, but the effect is rooted in biology. What actually matters is that in a true emergency, this glitch is not a distortion. It's a survival tool, sharpening focus when it's needed most. Sudden familiar smell memory. Half-spoken sentences often reveal how fragile speech really is. You intend one word, yet another slips through, turning the ordinary into something oddly out of place. Linguists call these moments speech errors, or more casually, slips of the tongue. They're more frequent than most people realize. Studies in the Journal of Memory and Language suggest that nearly everyone produces multiple slips each week. They rarely come out as gibberish. Instead, they tend to swap with words that sound alike or belong to the same category. The mind doesn't store vocabulary in neat boxes, but in overlapping networks, and sometimes those connections get crossed. Neuroscience points to competition at the moment of speech planning. When you prepare to say a word, nearby alternatives activate too. Under ideal conditions, the correct one wins, but fatigue, stress, or divided attention can give the wrong candidate a head start. That's why phone can so easily morph into fork. These mistakes have carried different meanings across time. Folklore sometimes treated them as omens, accidental prophecies hidden in missaid words. In the early 20th century, psychoanalysis famously reimagined them as leaks of unconscious thought, Freudian slips. But modern linguistics and cognitive science frame them as neutral byproducts of a high-speed system doing complex work with limited resources. Far from undermining language, slips of the tongue highlight its remarkable efficiency. The system works so quickly that occasional misfires are inevitable, and those mistakes, trivial as they seem, reveal the invisible structure of how meaning, sound, and memory intersect. Speech errors, then, are not flaws to be embarrassed by. They're reminders that even in everyday conversation, the brain's machinery is constantly balancing speed and precision, and every so often it lets us glimpse the gears. Wrong word glitch. On a quiet street at night, you walk alone. Each step lands with its familiar rhythm until suddenly you hear another set of footsteps behind you. You turn. No one is there. The sound vanishes, leaving only your heartbeat and the faint echo of your own stride. This is the false footstep echo, a glitch where the brain interprets ordinary sounds as the presence of another walker. Folklore has long tied it to spirits or unseen companions. In Scottish tradition, phantom steps were considered warnings of danger. In Japanese ghost stories, they were omens of restless souls. But modern science offers a different perspective. Research in auditory perception shows that the brain doesn't simply record sound, it constantly predicts it. Each time your heel strikes the ground, your nervous system expects the returning noise of the environment, the bounce off walls, pavement, or open space. When echoes arrive slightly out of sync, or when background noise masks them, the brain sometimes generates the missing beat. The result is a phantom footstep. Neuroscientists studying misattributed sounds link the effect to auditory pareidolia, the same process that makes us hear voices in static or patterns in meaningless noise. It is the auditory system favoring false positives, a survival mechanism tuned to notice possible threats rather than risk ignoring them. Clinically, similar misperceptions are documented in patients with heightened anxiety or those walking in acoustically complex environments, like empty parking garages. But even in healthy brains, the effect is common, especially when we're tired or on high alert. What actually matters is that the false footstep echo isn't a ghostly presence. It's the brain erring on the side of caution, reminding us that survival once depended on detecting the faintest sound of someone following close behind. False footstep echo. You walk through an empty parking garage. Your shoes strike the concrete, sharp and steady. But then, another rhythm slips in, softer, slightly delayed, like someone matching your pace. You pause, and the sound disappears. This experience is the false footstep echo, a glitch where the mind perceives an extra set of steps that aren't really there. Though unsettling, it is widely reported. In one survey of urban dwellers, nearly a third admitted to hearing phantom footsteps at least once in their lives. Cultural interpretations have always leaned toward the mysterious. Ancient Roman texts mention pederes incerti, uncertain footsteps, believed to be spirits of the restless dead. Centuries later, sailors in the age of exploration wrote of ghostly crew members trailing them on quiet decks. The pattern was the same: unexplained footsteps in moments of isolation. Modern neuroscience provides a more grounded account. When we walk, the auditory system doesn't just hear sound, it predicts it. The brain expects echoes to bounce back from walls, alleys, or enclosed spaces. If those reflections are delayed, distorted, or masked by ambient noise, the prediction may feel like a second walker. Studies of auditory pareidolia show that the brain is more likely to overdetect patterns in uncertain environments, especially when stress or fatigue is high. The mechanism leans toward caution. Mistaking an echo for a person behind you may trigger vigilance, while ignoring it could mean missing a threat. This small perceptual error reminds us that hearing is not a perfect recorder. It is a survival tool, tuned to detect danger even at the cost of false alarms. The fact to remember is that phantom footsteps are not signs of hidden presences. They're echoes of your own brain, misread as company. Phantom phone vibration. Everyday life is filled with signals and alerts, but sometimes the mind produces one on its own. Many people have experienced the odd sensation of a phone buzzing in their pocket, only to find no call, no message, and no vibration at all. This is known as phantom phone vibration. Surveys show just how widespread it is. In one study from Indiana University, nearly 90% of participants reported sensing vibrations that weren't real. For some, it happened only occasionally, while others felt them daily. The illusion has become common enough to be recognized as part of modern digital life. The underlying cause lies in how the brain interprets sensory input. Our nervous system is constantly processing faint signals from skin, muscles, and clothing. When we're primed to expect a notification, the brain may misclassify subtle sensations, a twitch, a shift of fabric, or a pressure change, as vibration. The more emotionally attached someone is to their phone, the more frequently the false buzz appears. The phenomenon isn't unique to smartphones. In earlier eras, soldiers reported phantom taps on their shoulders, and telegraph operators described sensing signals that never arrived. What changes across history is the object of focus, not the glitch itself. Neuroscientists suggest phantom vibrations reveal a deeper bias in perception. It is safer for the brain to over-detect signals than to risk missing something important. In today's world, that ancient bias is tuned toward devices. Phantom vibrations remind us that expectation alone can be powerful enough to create sensation. Proof that the brain doesn't just register the world, it sometimes invents it. The double-take delay. A driver passes a roadside sign, glances at it briefly, and keeps going. A few seconds later, something doesn't feel right. They look back again, realizing only then that the sign was misspelled. That small lag between perception and recognition is what we call the double-take delay. Cultural references have long exaggerated this moment into comedy. Vaudeville performers in the early 1900s turned the double-take into a stage gesture for shock or disbelief, a physical way of showing the audience that a character had noticed something unexpected. But beneath the humor lies a real cognitive process. Modern neuroscience explains that visual processing happens in stages. The eyes capture raw details almost instantly, but conscious recognition, linking those details to meaning, takes longer. If something doesn't match expectations, the information can hover in a pre-conscious state. The first glance sees it, but the second glance is when awareness truly locks on. Psychologists studying attention have connected this to what's known as delayed recognition, where familiar faces or unusual objects take an extra moment to cross the threshold into awareness. Experiments show that when people are distracted, tired, or overloaded with visual input, these delays grow more frequent. Clinically, this effect has even been observed in patients recovering from concussions, where the double take becomes a regular feature of slowed perception. Yet even in healthy brains, it serves a purpose, pausing to ensure accuracy before acting on incomplete information. What actually matters is that the double-take delay is not a flaw in vision, but a safeguard. It gives the brain a second chance to make sense of the world, a momentary pause between what is seen and what is truly understood. The HalfDream Blend. In a large-scale Japanese sleep survey, nearly 1 in 5 participants reported starting the day believing something had already happened, only to later realize it had been part of a dream. These mistaken memories, vivid yet fragile, are examples of the HalfDream Blend. The glitch happens in the liminal zone between sleep and waking. During this short window, fragments of dream imagery can be misfiled as waking events, a conversation that never occurred, a task already completed, or an imagined interaction may slip unnoticed into the memory bank. Hours later, the realization comes that the memory belongs to no real experience at all. Neuroscientists studying REM transitions have found that the brain's default mode network, active in both daydreaming and dreaming, overlaps with memory circuits, if these networks remain partially engaged after waking. Dream content can be tagged with the same real marker as lived experience. It is not the dream that feels unusual, but the certainty that it actually happened. Historically, such moments were often interpreted as visions. In ancient Mesopotamia, dream fragments carried into waking life were treated as divine instructions. In early psychology, researchers debated whether these blended memories revealed hidden subconscious conflicts. Modern science, however, places them within the ordinary yet fallible mechanics of memory formation. The HalfDream Blend shows just how permeable the border between worlds can be. Sleep and wakefulness, imagination and experience are not separate containers, but overlapping states. What actually matters is that these illusions demonstrate how memory is less like a photograph and more like a sketchbook, open to revision, occasionally inserting dream into life as if it belonged there all along. The reverse memory search. In daily life, recall usually feels straightforward. A question is asked, and an answer emerges, but sometimes the sequence slips. A detail arrives first, uninvited. A name, an image, a phrase, and only later does the mind remember what question or context it belongs to. This inversion is called the reverse memory search. What makes it striking is the sensation of time running backward inside the mind. Instead of a prompt leading to a response, the response appears before the prompt. The order of thought feels scrambled, even though the content is accurate. Neuroscience points to the structure of memory networks. Each stored detail is part of a vast web of associations, and activation can spread unpredictably. A single fragment can surface on its own, while the original trigger lags behind. When the missing piece finally clicks into place, the experience feels like memory has rewound. Clinical accounts add weight to the phenomenon. Patients with early memory disorders sometimes report answers falling out of nowhere, followed later by recognition of where they fit. But even healthy individuals notice the effect, especially when distracted or fatigued. Conditions where the timing of retrieval becomes less reliable. Culturally, such moments were once seen as intuition or insight. Ancient traditions often treated answers without questions as signs of inspiration, the mind receiving knowledge from an unseen source. Modern science instead views them as misaligned activation within the brain's associative circuits. The reverse memory search highlights how recall is less like searching a filing cabinet and more like sparks traveling a network. Sometimes the spark jumps ahead, lighting the answer before the path that leads to it. Object slip memory. A common complaint in neurology clinics sounds deceptively simple. I put the keys on the counter, but when I looked again, they were on the table. The object hadn't actually moved. The memory of placing it had slipped. This phenomenon is known as object slip memory. Unlike forgetting altogether, this glitch involves confidently remembering an action that never happened, or misplacing the location of an object you recently interacted with. People often describe it as the brain rewriting a moment in real time. Neuroscience suggests the cause lies in how memory and attention divide labor. When placing an object in a familiar environment, the brain often relies on automatic encoding, a shorthand that prioritizes efficiency over accuracy. If attention is pulled elsewhere, the hippocampus may record a default or expected location rather than the true one. This explains why keys, glasses, or phones are so often remembered in the wrong spot. Clinical research on everyday memory errors shows that these slips are more likely when people are under stress, multitasking, or fatigued. Sleep studies also suggest that during tired states, the boundary between imagined and enacted actions weakens, making it easier for the brain to store an intention as though it were reality. Historically, misplaced objects were sometimes interpreted superstitiously, as evidence of trickster spirits or poltergeists. In folklore from Scandinavia to South America, household objects moving on their own reflected what we now recognize as human memory errors. What actually matters is that object slip memory doesn't mean objects are vanishing and reappearing. It reflects the brain's tendency to prioritize patterns over precision, sometimes writing in the most likely detail instead of the correct one. The slip is less about the object and more about how memory quietly edits the world. Looping thought fragment. Late at night, you replay a single line in your head. A phrase, a tune, or even a sentence fragment repeats endlessly, circling back again and again. It isn't a full memory nor a complete song, just a shard of thought stuck on repeat. This is the glitch known as the looping thought fragment. Unlike deliberate rumination, these loops often feel automatic, as though the brain has latched onto a fragment and refuses to release it. Sleep researchers frequently note them during the transition to rest, when stray words or sounds can cycle for minutes or hours, delaying sleep. Neuroscience provides clues. The brain's working memory system, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, is designed to hold short-term information through recurrent activity. Normally, this activity fades once the information is used. But if attention lingers, or if a cue is incomplete, the neural loop can persist without resolution. The thought fragment keeps resurfacing because the brain never tags it as finished. Clinical studies connect these loops to what psychologists call perseveration, a tendency for repetition when cognitive control is taxed. While pathological forms appear in conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder, healthy people experience brief, harmless versions in everyday life. Even a catchy snippet of song, the so-called earworm, shares mechanisms with looping thought fragments, showing how easily the mind can be caught in repetition. Historically, looping thoughts were sometimes interpreted as signs of possession or outside influence. In folklore, intrusive lines or chants were framed as whispers from spirits. Today, science sees them as byproducts of an efficient, but sometimes over-sticky memory system. In practice, the looping thought fragment is a reminder that not all mental activity is voluntary. The mind is built on rhythms and cycles, and occasionally, one of those rhythms refuses to let go. Eye focus jump. You're reading a book when, without warning, your eyes shift slightly off the page. For a split second, the words blur. You didn't decide to move your gaze. yet focus jumped as if your eyes had a mind of their own. This is the glitch known as the eye focus jump. Ophthalmologists have long documented that the eyes are rarely still. Even when staring at a single point, they perform tiny adjustments called microsaccades. Normally, these movements are invisible to awareness. But occasionally, when a saccade overshoots or resets unexpectedly, we notice the sudden shift, a jarring moment where vision seems to jump. Neuroscience explains that these movements are essential. Without them, the photoreceptors in the retina would adapt to an unchanging image, causing the scene to fade. The jumps refresh the input, keeping vision alive. In other words, the instability of focus is not a flaw, but a requirement for continuous sight. Clinical studies show that stress, fatigue, or even subtle changes in attention can exaggerate these jumps, making them more noticeable. Some patients recovering from concussions report frequent eye focus slips, while healthy participants in lab settings often experience them during tasks demanding prolonged concentration. Historically, unusual eye movements were sometimes misinterpreted. Ancient texts described them as signs of distraction or weakness of will. In folklore, a sudden dart of the eyes was thought to reveal dishonesty or possession. Only with modern science did it become clear that the brain itself drives these shifts automatically. The eye focus jump feels like a glitch because it breaks the illusion of steady vision. In reality, it is the mechanism that prevents vision from collapsing. The fact to remember is that our eyes are never truly fixed. Stability in sight depends on constant, hidden motion. Mass coincidences in numbers. A man wakes at 3:33 a.m., glances at his phone later to see 333 unread emails, then notices a receipt total of $33.30. Each moment feels more than random, as if reality is nudging him with repeating numbers. These patterns are often called mass coincidences in numbers. The experience is widespread. People report seeing 1111 on clocks, sequences like 222 or 444 on license plates, or the same digits reappearing in phone numbers and addresses. To those who notice them, the recurrence can feel charged with meaning, like the world is coded with secret signals. Historically, number coincidences have carried strong cultural weight. In numerology, repeating digits were seen as messages from the universe. Ancient traditions often linked specific numbers to luck, fate, or divine order. Even today, digital culture reinforces these associations with angel numbers shared online as signs of guidance or synchronicity. Psychology explains it differently. Once a number catches your attention, the brain's selective attention system highlights it more often. This is the same mechanism behind the frequency illusion. The world hasn't changed, but what you notice has. In probability terms, repeated sequences are inevitable in daily life, given the sheer number of times we encounter digits. Mathematicians point out that across thousands of observations, clusters of similar numbers are not only possible, but expected. Still, the effect can feel powerful. For many, it serves as a pause, a moment of recognition in the noise of daily life. Whether interpreted as chance, significance, or simply a mental quirk, the pull of repeating digits remains strong. In practice, this means that mass coincidences in numbers aren't proof of hidden codes, but a reminder that once the mind tags something as meaningful, reality seems to echo it everywhere. Sleep identity confusion. Night can fracture identity in surprising ways. In rare moments after sleep, people awaken not only confused about their surroundings, but unsure of who they are. For a few heartbeats, name, age, and personal history all dissolve, leaving only raw awareness. This fleeting disorientation is known as sleep identity confusion. Sleep research shows it often emerges during abrupt awakenings from slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage of rest. In that state, the brain is focused on repair rather than awareness. If consciousness is forced back online too quickly, the machinery that maintains a stable sense of self may not reactivate in sync with sensory awareness. The body is awake, but the identity lags. Neuroscientists highlight the role of the frontal cortex, which integrates autobiographical memory and self-recognition. Because it reactivates more slowly than sensory areas, people can open their eyes, recognize a room, yet feel detached from their own story. Clinical reports describe the range of this glitch. Some briefly believe they are children again, while others see their partners as strangers until coherence returns. Sleep deprivation, jet lag, and irregular schedules increase the likelihood, suggesting that disruption of normal sleep cycles makes the glitch more likely to surface. Historically, such experiences were layered with spiritual meaning. Polynesian traditions describe the soul as lingering outside the body, delaying recognition at waking. In medieval Europe, morning disorientation was attributed to spirits tampering with sleepers. These interpretations reflect how deeply unsettling it is when identity, usually constant, momentarily fails. Today, the episodes are recognized as harmless, but revealing. They show that a sense of self is not fixed, but actively rebuilt each time we wake. Sleep identity confusion is less about losing who you are than witnessing how fragile the construction of identity can be. The vanishing task. You walk into a room with purpose. Maybe it's the kitchen, maybe the office. Halfway across the floor, the reason for being there evaporates. The task you set out to complete is gone, as if erased mid-step. This is what researchers call the vanishing task, a sudden collapse of intention that feels more like a glitch than a lapse. Psychologists at the University of Notre Dame uncovered part of the explanation. In controlled experiments, participants asked to carry out simple memory tasks consistently forgot more often when passing through a doorway. The act of crossing a boundary triggered what's called an event segmentation. The brain interprets the new environment as the start of a fresh chapter, and information from the previous scene is partially offloaded to make space. This doesn't mean the memory is destroyed. It lingers, often retrievable minutes later, sometimes only after retracing steps. What disappears is the easy accessibility, the thread of intention that was holding the task in place. Cultures long before modern neuroscience also noticed this slip. In some folk traditions, thresholds were seen as liminal zones, where thoughts could be disturbed by unseen forces. The superstition of pausing in a doorway or speaking a charm when crossing may have originated as a way to guard against this fragile moment of forgetting. Today, the phenomenon shows up most in everyday routines. The kitchen trip for a glass of water that ends in standing, blank, by the counter. The office worker who forgets a file on the way to a meeting. It isn't laziness or distraction. It's an architecture of memory shaped by context shifts. Random chills. A ripple runs through your skin. Tiny hairs lift. Your shoulders tense. And for a moment, your body reacts as though a sudden draft has swept through the room. But the air is still, the temperature unchanged. These sudden, unexplained waves are what we call random chills. Unlike shivering from cold, random chills appear without warning and without cause. They can happen while sitting at a desk, standing in line, or even in the middle of a conversation. The sensation is sharp, fleeting, and oddly memorable. Physiologists trace the effect to the body's autonomic system. the network that governs unconscious processes like heartbeat, breathing, and thermoregulation. A brief surge of sympathetic nervous activity, often triggered by nothing more than a fluctuation in hormones or neural firing, can produce the cascade. Muscles tighten, skin contracts, and goosebumps rise. Some researchers suggest the phenomenon is a leftover reflex from human evolution. Our ancestors' hair would have puffed out during such responses, making them appear larger to predators. With little body hair today, the reflex remains, but with no practical use, surfacing instead as an inexplicable shiver. Not all interpretations are biological. In many traditions, sudden chills have been linked to superstition, a sign someone is speaking your name, or that an unseen presence has passed nearby. These cultural frames highlight how humans often search for meaning in physical sensations that arrive without explanation. Yet random chills require no outside cause. They are reminders of how finely tuned, and sometimes unpredictable, the body's internal systems really are. A momentary shiver in a warm room may feel mysterious, but it is simply the nervous system testing its limits, producing a fleeting echo of an ancient survival response. Phantom swarm buzz. Late at night in a quiet room, a faint sound stirs the air, a soft buzzing, like insects circling just out of reach. The listener tenses, straining to locate the source. Yet when the lights come on, nothing is there. No flies, no machines, no swarm. The sound itself was a phantom. This phenomenon, sometimes called phantom swarm buzz, belongs to the broader family of auditory illusions. People describe it as humming, droning, or the faint vibration of wings. It often arises in silence, when the brain expects calm, which makes the sudden intrusion feel uncanny. Neuroscience offers one explanation. The auditory system is always active, monitoring for signals even in stillness. Background neural activity can sometimes be misinterpreted as real sound, particularly when attention is heightened. A 2016 study in hearing research suggested that under fatigue or stress, the brain's predictive coding system can generate noise internally and mislabel it as external. The buzz is not outside the ear, but within the auditory circuits themselves. History shows the phenomenon is not new. In rural folklore, persistent buzzing with no visible source was sometimes attributed to spirits, omens, or curses. Some traditions treated it as a warning of approaching storms or misfortune. The modern name might be new, but the experience of hearing invisible insects stretches far back. Most episodes are fleeting and harmless, though they highlight how fragile the boundary is between expectation and perception. The brain is not simply recording sound, it is building it, sometimes adding layers that aren't there. Phantom swarm buzz reminds us that silence is never absolute. Even in stillness, the mind can generate its own noise, conjuring the illusion of a world that hums when nothing moves at all. Time skip blink. Eyes close for what feels like a normal blink, and suddenly, the moment has jumped ahead. The train has moved further down the track, the clock has advanced a minute, or the speaker's sentence is already halfway through. Time itself seems to have slipped. This is the experience called a time skip blink. Researchers studying microsleeps have noted that the boundary between a blink and a brief lapse of awareness can be thin. While a normal blink lasts just a few hundred milliseconds, under fatigue or monotony, the brain may extend that gap into seconds. From the outside, the person still appears awake, but awareness itself has dipped out of sequence. Neuroscience points to lapses in the brain's attentional networks. In particular, the thalamus and prefrontal cortex can momentarily disengage, reducing the continuity of perception. A 2013 study in Nature Communications showed that even tiny drops in neural activity can cause people to miss events entirely, leaving the impression that time has jumped forward. Cultural interpretations, however, often lean on mystery. In folklore, lost moments were sometimes blamed on spirits stealing time. In modern accounts, they're linked to paranormal stories or glitches in the Matrix. The uncanny quality of noticing that the world has moved without you makes the experience fertile ground for such explanations. For most people, time-skip blinks are harmless and pass unnoticed. They usually emerge during exhaustion, repetitive tasks, or prolonged focus. Yet the sensation of missing a fragment of reality can leave a lasting impression, a reminder that continuity is not guaranteed. Time-skip blinks show that time itself is steady, but our perception of it is stitched together in fragile seams. Sometimes the stitching skips. The reverse memory search. Someone hums a tune without knowing why. Minutes later, a memory clicks. They had overheard the same melody in a cafe earlier that day. The answer comes first, the question second. Psychologists call this reversal. Recall the reverse memory search. Normally, memory retrieval follows a predictable path. A cue triggers a search, and the brain delivers the missing detail. But in these moments, the sequence is inverted. A detail, name, or image rises into awareness, seemingly unprompted, and only afterward does the mind reconnect it to its source. Cognitive science explains this through associative networks. Memories are stored not as isolated files, but as webs of connections. Sometimes, a piece of that web lights up on its own, a face, a word, a fragment, before the rest of the network reassembles. The effect feels uncanny because the product surfaces before the original cue. Research on spontaneous recall supports the idea. A 2015 study in memory and cognition found that delayed associations often appear backward, with the stored item emerging first and the initiating context retrieved later. The brain, it seems, does not always obey a strict order in rebuilding memory. Historically, sudden answers without questions were often interpreted as inspiration or prophecy. Ancient poets described words arriving before thought, while oracles were said to channel knowledge from outside themselves. What feels like revelation may, in fact, be the same cognitive reversal at work. The reverse memory search highlights that memory is not a linear process, but a dynamic reconstruction. Sometimes the brain delivers fragments in reverse order, leaving us with the eerie sense of knowing before remembering why. Phantom tap sensation. Someone sitting quietly feels it. A light tap on the shoulder, the brush of a fingertip against the arm. They turn, expecting contact, but no one is there. This fleeting experience is called the phantom tap sensation. Reports of phantom touches appear frequently in psychology surveys. Many describe them as faint and specific, often compared to the weight of a finger or the buzz of a phone against the skin. They tend to occur during moments of stillness, when the nervous system is more attuned to subtle cues. Neuroscience suggests the cause lies in how the brain integrates touch signals. The somatosensory cortex, which maps the body, doesn't just wait for input, it constantly predicts it. A stray firing of neurons, or a mismatch between expectation and reality, can create the illusion of contact. A 2014 study in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience found that such phantom sensations share neural activity patterns with genuine touch, which explains why the feeling is convincing even in the absence of pressure. Historically, unexplained touches were often attributed to spirits, guardian angels, or ill omens. In folklore, the sensation of being tapped or brushed without a source carried symbolic weight, a warning, a blessing, or the presence of something unseen. These interpretations show how deeply humans link touch with meaning, even when no physical cause exists. Today, researchers note that stress, fatigue, or heightened vigilance can make phantom taps more likely. The nervous system becomes hypersensitive, turning background signals into the impression of contact. Fading familiarity. Someone looks at a place they know well. A favorite cafe, a childhood street, a colleague's face. And for a moment, it feels oddly unfamiliar. The recognition is delayed, as though the brain hesitates before confirming what it sees. This lapse is known as fading familiarity. Psychologists often classify it alongside déjà vu and jamais vu, phenomena where memory and recognition misalign. In fading familiarity, the shift moves in the opposite direction of déjà vu. Instead of the new feeling old, the familiar briefly feels new or strange. Neuroscience links the effect to the brain's recognition circuits. The hippocampus and surrounding medial temporal lobe regions normally integrate incoming sensory data with stored representations. If this process falters, due to fatigue, stress, or even random fluctuations in neural firing, recognition signals may fail to register immediately. A 2006 study in Neuropsychologia found that even small timing errors in these circuits can interrupt the sense of familiarity, producing moments of uncertainty where none should exist. Clinical accounts add further detail. Some patients with temporal lobe epilepsy report fading familiarity episodes as part of their auras, experiencing familiar environments as alien for seconds at a time. Yet similar glitches have been reported by healthy individuals, particularly under conditions of exhaustion or distraction. Historically, episodes of unfamiliarity were sometimes interpreted as disconnection of the soul from the body, or as signs of being out of phase with reality. Folklore often described these sensations as temporary enchantments or veils over perception. Today, fading familiarity is studied as a short-lived disruption of recognition rather than a sign of deeper dysfunction. In both clinical records and everyday reports, the phenomenon appears as a brief but striking glitch where the known world momentarily loses its certainty. Eye focus jump. During quiet reading or while looking across a room, vision suddenly shifts. The eyes lock onto one point, then without warning, the focus leaps to another. Nothing in the environment has moved, yet the gaze seems pulled away, as if the visual system skipped a frame. This is the eye focus jump. Ophthalmologists describe it as a type of microsaccade, a tiny involuntary movement of the eyes that occurs even when trying to fix the gaze. Normally, these movements are so small, they stabilize perception and prevent visual fading. But sometimes they misfire, producing a sensation that attention has been yanked elsewhere. A 2004 study in vision research documented how microsaccades can disrupt steady fixation, with participants reporting brief disorientation when their gaze shifted unexpectedly. Neuroscientists traced the mechanism to the superior colliculus, a midbrain structure that directs rapid eye movements. When signals misalign, the system produces a jump rather than smooth control. Clinical observations note that stress, fatigue, or prolonged visual concentration can make these jumps more noticeable. People who spend long hours reading, coding, or gaming often describe sudden refocusing events, as though their own eyes had made a decision without them. Historically, such experiences were less precisely explained. In some accounts, sudden visual slips were treated as signs of distraction or even external interference, moments when vision was thought to falter under unseen influence. Today, eye-focus jumps are studied within normal vision science. They are brief, harmless, and common, though their presence reveals just how little conscious control exists over eye movements. In both lab experiments and everyday life, the phenomenon is recognized as a small but clear glitch in gaze stability, when the eyes reposition without intent. Phantom smear vision. While moving the eyes across a page or scanning a bright screen, a faint streak seems to trail behind objects. A letter, a shape, or even a light source appears to smear for an instant, leaving a trace that shouldn't exist. This fleeting distortion is known as phantom smear vision. Ophthalmologists link the effect to how the visual system handles rapid motion. When the eyes move, the retina continues to receive light, but perception is suppressed to prevent blur. If this suppression is incomplete, lingering impressions may overlap with the next frame of vision. The result is a smear, as though sight itself dragged the image forward. A 2010 study in investigative ophthalmology and visual science described how certain lighting conditions and high contrast patterns increase the likelihood of smearing effects, especially during quick shifts of gaze. Neurologically, the phenomenon involves both retinal persistence and cortical processing delays. Traces of the old image remain active as new input arrives. Clinical reports show that phantom smear vision is more noticeable in people with uncorrected vision issues, such as astigmatism, or in cases where medications or fatigue alter the stability of eye movements. Yet even healthy eyes can produce the effect under specific conditions of brightness and speed. Historically, descriptions of streaking or trailing light often appeared in mystical writings, where such visual traces were interpreted as energy fields or auras. In some cultural traditions, the smears were seen as glimpses of a hidden layer of reality, rather than a byproduct of perception. Today, the phenomenon is understood as a transient error in how vision transitions between moments. Phantom smear vision is documented in both medical research and everyday reports as a clear example of perception carrying traces further than it should. The word jam. During a televised interview in 1990, a politician attempted to answer a simple question, but became stuck. The first syllable of his response repeated 3 times before he managed to continue. He later admitted the moment wasn't about nerves. His mind had simply jammed. This ordinary but disruptive glitch is what psychologists call the word jam. In daily life, the experience is common. A person begins to speak, finds the first sound blocked, and repeats or stumbles until the sentence finally breaks free. Sometimes the pause is brief. Other times, the jam derails the entire thought. Neuroscience links this to the delicate coordination between planning and motor execution. The brain prepares words in stages, first selecting the concept, then retrieving the sounds, and finally triggering the muscles of speech. If these processes overlap or compete, the system can stall. The tongue waits for an instruction that hasn't arrived in time, producing repetition or silence. Clinical research on stuttering sheds light on the same mechanism. Though chronic stuttering is distinct, many people experience brief versions of it under stress or fatigue. Functional imaging shows irregular activity in the basal ganglia and speech motor circuits, which may explain why the smooth flow of words sometimes locks up. Historically, word jams carried heavy cultural meaning. In ancient rhetoric, a speaker's stumble was seen as weakness. In superstition, it was thought to signal a lie. Modern science reframes it as a momentary misfire in a highly complex system that usually works seamlessly. The word jam is less a flaw than a glimpse of how much effort lies behind everyday speech. Billions of neurons coordinate to produce even a single sentence, and sometimes, in the middle of that choreography, the rhythm slips. Sleep jolt dialogue. In 2003, a sleep clinic in Boston recorded a patient who, just as he began to drift off, blurted out a full sentence. "Don't close the gate." Moments later, he was awake, confused, and unable to recall why he said it. This odd mix of dream and waking speech is called sleep jolt dialogue. The glitch occurs during the transition into sleep, when the brain's motor systems briefly reactivate while dream fragments are forming. Instead of remaining internal, a piece of dream thought is spoken aloud, often accompanied by a sudden jerk of the body. Unlike sleep talking, which happens deeper in the night, this dialogue comes at the threshold between wakefulness and sleep. Neuroscientists studying hypnic jerks, the sudden twitches many people feel as they fall asleep, note that they often coincide with bursts of cortical activity. When language areas are momentarily engaged, the twitch can be paired with a vocal outburst. The result is a sentence or phrase that feels startlingly out of place. Clinical reports describe these episodes as harmless but memorable. Some people shout single words, others produce half-formed conversations. In every case, the sleeper usually wakes within seconds, startled by their own voice. Historically, sudden speech during sleep onset carried symbolic meaning. In medieval Europe, it was sometimes taken as a sign of possession or prophecy, a moment when unseen forces broke through. Folklore across Asia treated unexpected words at sleep's edge as warnings, not glitches. Modern sleep science strips away the superstition. These episodes are brief misfires at the border of consciousness. Reminders that sleep is not a simple switch, but a gradual shift where waking circuits occasionally spill into dreams. A stray sentence in the night isn't revelation. It's the mind catching itself mid-transition. Mirror recognition delay. In a restroom, someone glances at the mirror and hesitates. For a fraction of a second, the face looking back feels unfamiliar. Recognition snaps into place almost immediately, but the momentary disorientation lingers. This brief lapse is called mirror recognition delay. Under normal conditions, the visual system identifies a face and ties it to the self so quickly that the process feels instantaneous. But when fatigue, stress, or unusual lighting slow the loop, the reflection can be registered as a face before identity is fully attached. For that instant, the mirror appears to show a stranger. Neuroscientists point to the interaction between the occipital lobe, which handles visual input, and the fusiform gyrus, which specializes in face recognition. If communication between these systems stutters, the brain processes a face without immediately labeling it as my face. A 2012 neuroimaging study demonstrated that recognition delays can occur when attention is taxed, increasing the likelihood of these slips. Clinical reports suggest mirror recognition delay is more common in people with disrupted sleep or migraines. Extreme versions appear in rare disorders like Capgras syndrome, where recognition failures extend beyond mirrors to loved ones themselves. Outside of pathology, however, the glitch is short-lived and harmless. Historically, mirrors carried heavy symbolic weight. In European folklore, hesitation before your own reflection was taken as a bad omen, sometimes even a sign of death approaching. Other traditions describe mirrors as portals where identity could falter, reflecting not just the body, but something beyond it. Today, mirror recognition delay is documented in psychology and neurology, as a normal but striking error in processing. It stands as one of the clearest examples of how fragile self-recognition can be when perception momentarily falls out of sync. The name block. At a family gathering, you reach to introduce someone. The face is clear, the relationship obvious, but the name refuses to surface. Seconds stretch, and the harder you try, the further it slips away. This is the name block. The glitch is one of the most common memory lapses, affecting nearly everyone regardless of age. Studies show that even healthy young adults forget familiar names multiple times a week. Names, unlike other words, are unusually fragile in memory. Neuroscience explains why. Most words carry meaning that anchors them. Chair links to the object, blue to a color. Names, however, are arbitrary labels. The hippocampus and temporal lobes must retrieve them without the support of strong semantic networks. Under distraction or fatigue, this system falters, leaving the name just out of reach. Psychologists call this the tip of the tongue state. Imaging studies reveal that during these episodes, partial information is often activated. The first letter, the number of syllables, or similar sounding names. The brain is circling the target without locking on. Historically, forgetting a name was seen as revealing. Freud famously suggested slips in recall exposed repressed feelings toward the person. Folklore in some regions took it as an omen, a sign that the individual might soon leave your life. Today, science treats it less dramatically, an artifact of how names are stored and retrieved. Clinical research notes that frequency of name blocks increases with age, not because of memory loss itself, but because retrieval systems slow slightly over time. Still, the phenomenon remains universal, not pathological. The name block illustrates the fragility of memory's most personal labels. Faces and voices may linger effortlessly, but a single name can vanish in the very moment it's most needed. Tunnel vision. Under pressure, the world doesn't always appear as it truly is. In moments of sudden fear or extreme effort, people often report that their surroundings seem to shrink, details at the edges dissolve, and only a narrow circle of vision remains. This phenomenon is known as tunnel vision. It occurs most often in high-stress situations. Police officers in dangerous encounters describe remembering only the central action while missing events happening nearby. Athletes in competition have spoken of being so locked on a goal that the stadium around them disappears. Even drivers in emergencies describe the same constriction, the edges of the world fading as the focus collapses inward. The underlying mechanism is tied to the body's stress response. When the sympathetic nervous system surges, it channels resources toward survival. Blood flow, attention, and neural processing are concentrated on what lies directly ahead. The periphery, which normally supplies a wide field of context, is pushed aside. Laboratory studies have confirmed this. Under induced stress, participants consistently show narrowed fields of attention compared to their calmer state. Cultural accounts of tunnel-like vision appear in very different contexts. People who have come close to death describe moving through a narrowing corridor of light. Religious and mystical writings have linked it to spiritual passage. While interpretations vary, researchers point to the same biological roots, the brain under duress filtering perception to its core. Tunnel vision passes once the body returns to calm, but while it lasts, it can profoundly shape how events are experienced and remembered. What it reveals is that vision is not a fixed window on the world, but a flexible system, one that can collapse its field in an instant when the mind believes survival depends on focus. The empty blink. During a routine blink, vision should cut out and return so seamlessly that the gap goes unnoticed, but occasionally the system stumbles. The eyelids close, reopen, and for a split second, sight doesn't resume. This brief blackout is called the empty blink. Unlike normal afterimages or momentary dryness, the empty blink has nothing to do with the eye itself. Researchers studying eye-brain coordination note that the visual cortex actively suppresses incoming signals during each blink to prevent a blur. In 2008, work published in Current Biology found that this suppression extends slightly beyond the physical closure. If the restart signal doesn't line up, awareness registers a frame of nothing. Case reports describe it most often in people performing repetitive tasks, assembly line workers, proofreaders, and long-distance drivers, where visual prediction systems are heavily taxed. The pause appears not as fatigue of the eyes, but as a rare mismatch between neural timing and expectation. Outside science, the event has been framed very differently. Early naturalists described it as a skip in the lantern, comparing the eye to a flickering flame that sometimes missed its beat. In some 19th century seafaring diaries, sailors wrote of blank blinks during long watches, treating them as the ocean's way of stealing moments from perception. Today, the empty blink remains little studied but well documented in clinical notes and self-reports. A perceptual gap that appears without warning, then resolves just as quickly. No symbolism is required. The term simply names a failure of synchronization between the act of blinking and the return of sight. Lost sentence bug. In the middle of reading a sentence, your eyes close for the briefest moment. When they open, a word or two is missing, as if time skipped. You didn't lose focus, you blinked. What feels ordinary hides a small glitch, the empty blink. Humans blink about 15 to 20 times per minute. Each one lasts only a fraction of a second, but during that instant, visual input is blocked. Under most conditions, the brain fills in the gap, creating the illusion of continuous vision. Occasionally, though, the system slips. Instead of a seamless flow, the blink leaves a blank, and awareness catches the discontinuity. Neuroscience has explored this through high-speed eye-tracking studies. Researchers found that the brain actively suppresses awareness of vision loss during a blink, similar to how it suppresses blur during eye movements. This suppression usually prevents us from noticing the breaks, but when attention is tightly focused, for instance, while reading or watching a fast-moving scene, even a millisecond lapse can feel like information has dropped out. Clinical reports note that empty blinks are more common when people are tired, dehydrated, or straining their eyes. In such cases, the brain's ability to compensate weakens, and the missing moment becomes noticeable. Historically, sudden blanks in awareness were sometimes described in mystical terms. Ancient Chinese texts linked momentary vision loss to the idea of the soul briefly departing. In European folklore, fleeting lapses during blinking were considered openings where spirits could pass unseen. Modern science offers a simpler explanation. The empty blink is not supernatural, but a reminder of how perception is stitched together. A single blink can hide a fragment of the world, showing that what we see is less continuous than it feels. False start walk. On a busy sidewalk, a man steps forward, halts abruptly, and then resumes walking as if nothing happened. To bystanders, it looks like hesitation, but to him, it feels like his body moved before his mind had fully decided. This small misfire is what we call the false start walk. The glitch appears when motor planning jumps ahead of conscious intent. Walking is mostly automatic, controlled by circuits in the spinal cord and basal ganglia. These systems prepare movement in advance, predicting when it will be needed. Occasionally, though, the plan executes too early, producing a premature step that the conscious mind cancels at the last second. Neuroscience studies on gait initiation show that even before we take a step, muscles in the legs and trunk are already subtly shifting. This pre-activation makes walking smooth and efficient. But when timing slips, because of distraction, fatigue, or uncertainty, the first step launches without full approval, leading to the odd stutter of a false start. Clinical research has noted similar effects in patients with Parkinson's disease, where gait initiation often misfires. In healthy people, it happens less dramatically, surfacing as an everyday quirk of a system designed for speed rather than precision. Cultural interpretations once gave hesitation symbolic meaning. In Japanese tradition, stepping forward and stopping was thought to signal bad luck, as though the body sensed danger ahead. In parts of Europe, sudden halts during walking were framed as omens or warnings. Today, science views it differently. Not foresight, but a momentary mismatch between unconscious preparation and conscious control. The false start walk shows that even the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other depends on a delicate choreography, one that sometimes takes a half step too soon. The thought collision. In 2016, a group of researchers at the University of California asked volunteers to describe what it felt like to lose their train of thought. One common answer stood out. It felt like two thoughts crashed into each other and both disappeared. This description captures what we now call the thought collision. The glitch occurs when two mental processes compete for the same space in working memory. Instead of one idea moving smoothly into another, they overlap, disrupt, and cancel. The result is a sudden blank, a sentence cut short, or a plan that evaporates midstream. Neuroscience traces this to the limits of working memory, which can hold only a handful of items at once. The prefrontal cortex manages this space, juggling language, images, and intentions. When two streams arrive simultaneously, the system falters. Both thoughts remain active, but neither is strong enough to win. Awareness registers the clash as a pause or disappearance. Clinical studies show that collisions are more frequent under stress, fatigue, or multitasking. Sleep research also suggests that partial wakefulness, like the groggy state after a nap, increases the likelihood of competing thoughts interfering. Historically, such moments were explained in moral or spiritual terms. In medieval Europe, stumbling over speech was sometimes seen as divine intervention, silencing inappropriate words. In Buddhist writings, thought collisions were framed as signs of distraction, illustrating the restless nature of the mind. Modern science sees no hidden meaning, only a system designed for efficiency, sometimes overloading. The collision is not failure, but the cost of processing at high speed. The thought collision reminds us that the mind is not a seamless stream, but a crowded intersection. And sometimes, two ideas arrive at the same moment, blocking each other out. Reappearing, item glitch. You search a desk for a pen. Drawers open, surfaces are checked twice, and nothing appears. Frustrated, you give up. Minutes later, the same pen sits plainly on the desk, exactly where you looked before. This is the reappearing item glitch. The experience is widespread, but rarely studied in formal science. People consistently report searching for an object in one location, failing to see it, and later finding it in the exact same spot. The unsettling part is not the retrieval, but the certainty that the item wasn't there earlier. Neuroscience offers several explanations. One is inattentional blindness. When attention is too narrowly focused, the eyes may take in information without awareness recognizing it. Another possibility is memory substitution. The brain falsely records having checked a location thoroughly, when in fact the scan was incomplete. When the object is spotted later, the memory conflict creates the impression of disappearance and return. Clinical research into visual perception errors shows how easily objects can be overlooked in plain sight. Under stress or fatigue, the brain may prioritize speed over detail, leading to what psychologists call looked but failed to see events. This explains why drivers sometimes miss obvious hazards, and why a missing item may go unnoticed until attention resets. Folklore has long offered supernatural interpretations. In European traditions, household spirits were said to borrow objects, returning them once mischief was complete. Similar stories appear in Latin American cultures, where vanished and returned belongings were blamed on playful spirits. Science reframes these accounts as cognitive slips rather than external forces. The reappearing item glitch highlights the fallibility of both vision and memory, showing that sometimes the object never left. It was our perception that briefly failed to keep track. Instant mood flip. In 1998, psychiatrists in Finland documented a curious case. A woman who described her mood as snapping from calm to irritable within seconds without any clear trigger. She wasn't alone. Surveys suggest that brief unexplained swings are common in the general population. These sudden shifts are what we call the instant mood flip. The glitch is striking because it feels disproportionate. A person might be fine one moment, then suddenly heavy, restless, or unexpectedly light-hearted the next. Unlike gradual mood changes, the flip arrives abruptly without an obvious cause. Neuroscience points to the balance of neurotransmitters as a likely explanation. The brain's emotional regulation relies on rapid signaling between regions like the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and limbic system. A small surge of dopamine or cortisol, even without external provocation, can trigger a sharp emotional pivot. These bursts often come and go unnoticed, but when strong enough, they produce a felt change in mood. Sleep studies reveal that flips are more common under fatigue, when regulation circuits are unstable. Clinical observations show that stress and hormonal cycles can also create conditions for sudden shifts. Even in healthy individuals, these swings reflect the sensitivity of mood systems to internal fluctuations. Cultural interpretations have long leaned toward the mystical. Ancient Greeks described mood flips as evidence of divine influence, sudden arrivals of inspiration or despair. In other traditions, abrupt shifts were framed as signs of spiritual possession. Modern science, however, reframes them as byproducts of a complex emotional system operating on unstable rhythms. The instant mood flip demonstrates that emotions are not fixed states, but dynamic processes, vulnerable to internal jolts. A single invisible chemical surge can redraw the landscape of feeling in an instant, with or without a reason. Invisible obstacle trip. On a flat, familiar stretch of ground, a man suddenly stumbles. There's no crack in the pavement, no stone underfoot, yet his body reacts as if he's collided with something real. Embarrassed, he keeps walking, uncertain of what just happened. This is the invisible obstacle trip. The glitch occurs when the coordination between brain and body slips out of sync. Walking feels automatic, but it depends on a constant stream of predictions. The brain estimates how each step will land, adjusting for balance, terrain, and movement. If the prediction misaligns, even slightly, the leg moves as if something blocked its path. Neuroscientists studying gait mechanics explain this through motor prediction errors. The brain uses internal models to anticipate resistance. When the expected sensory feedback doesn't match reality, the system briefly falters, producing a stumble with no visible cause. It is the body reacting to an error in its own forecast. Clinical observations show these trips happen more often under fatigue or distraction, when fine-tuned adjustments weaken. Athletes sometimes experience them during recovery from injury, when their nervous system overestimates or underestimates how the body should respond. Culturally, unexplained stumbles have carried symbolic meaning. In some traditions, tripping on nothing was considered a sign of bad luck or a warning from unseen forces. Folklore in parts of South America even attributed such stumbles to mischievous spirits tugging at the ankles of passers-by. Modern science offers a less mystical but equally intriguing view. These moments reveal just how much of walking is prediction rather than reaction. The invisible obstacle trip shows that even the simplest movement relies on constant guesses, and sometimes the body trips not on the world, but on its own expectations. Silent laugh loop. During a late-night comedy show, a researcher noticed something peculiar. Audience members sometimes laughed so hard that no sound emerged, just shaking shoulders and open mouths, caught in a cycle of breathless convulsions. The sound returned only after several seconds. This common but curious moment is called the silent laugh loop. Unlike ordinary laughter, which alternates between bursts of air and brief inhalations, the silent loop occurs when the rhythm collapses. The diaphragm contracts so strongly and so quickly that airflow is restricted. The body still moves through the motions of laughter, but the sound cuts out, leaving only silence and visible spasms. Physiologists studying laughter describe it as a respiratory event. It depends on a delicate balance between exhaling and resetting the lungs for the next burst. When laughter becomes intense, the body overshoots. Oxygen dips, breathing muscles lock, and the laugh becomes voiceless. Clinical observations show that people often experience dizziness or tears during prolonged silent laughing fits, both caused by rapid changes in breathing and blood flow. Sleep researchers even note that the loop can appear in hypnagogic states, when the body rehearses laughter without sound while drifting into dreams. Cultural interpretations have sometimes framed silent laughter as meaningful. In certain traditions, laughter without sound was considered a sign of insincerity. In others, it was thought to mark the boundary between amusement and loss of control, joy tipping into helplessness. Modern science sees no hidden message, only a natural limit of the respiratory system under strain. The silent laugh loop reminds us that even in moments of joy, the body has thresholds, and when pushed past them, laughter itself can briefly vanish, leaving only the echo of its rhythm. The wrong hand reach. You sit at your desk, ready to pick up your phone. Without thinking, your left hand lifts. Even though the phone is clearly placed on your right, the motion feels natural until you notice the mistake. This brief misfire is called the wrong hand reach. The glitch arises from how the brain plans movement before awareness catches up. Actions like reaching are handled by motor programs, pre-built routines the nervous system uses to save time. When an object is familiar or often kept in a certain spot, the brain may automatically trigger the usual hand, regardless of where the object actually is. Neuroscience research into motor control shows that these routines depend heavily on context and habit. Imaging studies reveal that the premotor cortex prepares multiple possible actions at once, with one selected at the last moment. If attention wavers, the default hand can activate before the correct one, leading to the awkward reach. Clinical observations of stroke patients and individuals with motor disorders highlight more extreme versions where misreaching becomes frequent. But in healthy people, the wrong hand reach is simply a reminder of how much movement runs on autopilot. Historically, reaching with the wrong hand was sometimes loaded with symbolism. In certain traditions, using the left hand by mistake was seen as unlucky or as evidence of distraction or disrespect. Folklore often tied misreaching to omens or outside interference, reflecting the unease of watching the body act without full control. Modern science reframes it as a momentary mismatch between habit and attention. The wrong hand reach shows that even the simplest gestures are predictions, shortcuts built from experience, and sometimes the prediction slips, sending the hand before the mind. Sudden scene snap. You're walking down a street, immersed in thought. Without warning, the entire scene seems to reset. The colors, the arrangement of people, even the sense of perspective feels briefly new, as if you've stepped into a replica of the same place. This fleeting disruption is called the sudden scene snap. The glitch occurs when the brain's systems for continuous perception lose synchronization. Normally, vision and memory blend seamlessly, giving the impression of an unbroken stream. But sometimes the loop stutters. Instead of gradual change, the environment feels like it has been reloaded in an instant. Neuroscience research suggests that this may involve the hippocampus and visual cortex, which work together to maintain spatial continuity. If the hippocampus momentarily fails to bind the ongoing scene with short-term memory, the experience resets, producing the feeling of abrupt novelty. Sleep deprivation and stress make this more likely, since both disrupt the brain's capacity to integrate sensory input smoothly. Clinical accounts describe similar sensations in individuals with temporal lobe epilepsy, where seizures sometimes trigger brief but intense scene resets. In everyday life, the effect is far less dramatic, a harmless misfire in the machinery of perception. Cultural interpretations once gave these moments symbolic weight. In some Buddhist traditions, the sudden freshness of a scene was seen as a glimpse of impermanence, a reminder that the world is recreated each instant. Folklore in Europe treated abrupt shifts in awareness as evidence of crossing into a fairy space, where the ordinary world doubled back on itself. Modern science explains the phenomenon without mysticism. The sudden scene snap shows that perception is not continuous film, but a rapid series of constructed frames, and every so often, the reel jumps, making the familiar world appear suddenly new. The unread word familiarity. A person scans a crowded page of text and pauses at a word they haven't read before. Strangely, it feels familiar, as if they've seen it somewhere, even though they're certain it's new. This puzzling moment is the unread word familiarity glitch. The phenomenon reflects the gap between recognition and comprehension. Neuroscience shows that the brain often detects the shape and pattern of words before fully processing their meaning. Visual familiarity alone can trigger a sense of recognition, even without prior knowledge. Studies in cognitive psychology link this to the illusion of memory. The brain is tuned to spot recurring shapes and letter sequences. If a word shares structure with others already known, in rhythm, spelling, or syllable count, it may feel oddly familiar, even if it's never been encountered before. Clinical observations find that the effect is more common when people are fatigued or skimming quickly. In those states, the brain leans on shortcuts, relying on pattern detection rather than deep reading. Sleep research has even shown that words briefly flashed during non-REM sleep can later feel recognized despite not being consciously remembered. Historically, unfamiliar yet familiar words were often given mystical interpretations. In Renaissance Europe, strange but resonant words were taken as incantations or fragments of forgotten languages. Folklore in several cultures treated the experience as a sign of past lives, words echoing from somewhere beyond memory. Modern science instead frames it as an artifact of predictive processing. Reading isn't passive, it's an active guesswork system. When the brain encounters a new word, it sometimes confuses similarity with prior exposure. The unread word familiarity glitch shows that recognition is not proof of memory. It is the brain's habit of mistaking patterns for things we've truly known. Direction flip. On a familiar road, a driver suddenly feels certain they should turn left, only to realize seconds later that right was the correct direction. The sensation isn't simple forgetfulness. It feels as though the brain temporarily inverted orientation. This is the glitch known as the direction flip. The experience highlights how fragile spatial orientation can be. Navigation depends on the hippocampus, which builds mental maps, and the parietal cortex, which tracks body position. Together, they generate a sense of where we are and where we need to go. But these systems can sometimes misfire, flipping orientation briefly before correcting themselves. Psychologists studying this effect have linked it to what they call reversal errors. Under fatigue or distraction, the brain may swap left and right when recalling a planned movement. These flips are usually caught quickly, but for a moment, the incorrect direction feels strangely convincing. Sleep researchers note that disorientation is more common when people are under-rested, since the brain's spatial circuits rely heavily on consolidated memory. Clinical reports also show that the effect can be magnified in patients with mild neurological conditions, though in healthy individuals, it usually surfaces only as an occasional everyday glitch. Cultural interpretations often gave direction flips symbolic weight. In Greek superstition, mistakenly turning the wrong way on a journey was considered a bad omen. In Japanese folklore, travelers who lost their bearings were said to have been momentarily led astray by spirits. Modern science offers no mystical explanation, only the reality of a navigation system that sometimes lags behind itself. The direction flip shows that orientation is not absolute. Even on familiar paths, the brain can briefly turn the world inside out before snapping it back into place. Sudden brain rewind. In 1974, neurologists recorded the account of a man who swore he had just lived through the same 10 seconds twice. He described the world as if it had snapped back, his mind replaying the immediate past in perfect detail before carrying on as normal. Today, we call this the sudden brain rewind. The glitch is defined by an uncanny replay of recent experience. A conversation restarts, a movement feels duplicated, or a moment seems to run twice. Unlike Déjà Vu, which is about familiarity, the brain rewind feels like an actual reset, as though awareness has briefly doubled back in time. Neuroscience suggests that the cause lies in the hippocampus, the brain center for encoding short-term memory. Normally, experiences are recorded and passed forward in a seamless stream. But when encoding slips, fragments can be replayed instead of filed away. Functional imaging studies show that temporal lobe activity often spikes during these resets, which may explain why they feel so vivid. Clinical observations link sudden rewinds to fatigue, stress, or even small seizures in some patients. For most people, however, they occur sporadically and harmlessly, a product of the brain's complex timing mechanisms briefly falling out of sync. Cultural accounts gave the phenomenon a more mystical frame. In Hindu philosophy, time loops were sometimes interpreted as glimpses of the cyclical nature of reality. European folklore spoke of time slips, moments when reality bent backward before resuming its course. Modern science strips away the supernatural. What feels like rewinding time is instead a replay within the machinery of memory itself. The sudden brain rewind shows that consciousness is not continuous film, but a fragile sequence. And sometimes the projector jumps, replaying the same frame before moving on. The AutoSentence Fill. A woman begins to speak. "I'll meet you at the..." And before she consciously decides, the sentence finishes itself. Sometimes the automatic ending is correct. Other times, it's not what she intended. This is the AutoSentence Fill, a glitch where language seems to write itself. The phenomenon emerges from the predictive nature of speech. Neuroscience shows that when forming sentences, the brain doesn't build each word one at a time. Instead, it prepares likely structures in advance, relying on stored patterns from years of language use. The result is efficiency, but also the risk that a phrase completes itself before conscious thought weighs in. Psycholinguistic studies have found that listeners can often predict the end of a sentence with surprising accuracy. Speakers, too, rely on the same shortcuts. When tired, distracted, or speaking quickly, the AutoPilot system can overtake deliberate planning, producing endings that feel both involuntary and inevitable. Clinical observations in patients with mild aphasia show exaggerated versions of this process, where sentence completions become rigid and repetitive. In healthy individuals, though, the effect is subtle, surfacing only in slips, strange substitutions, or unplanned endings. Culturally, auto-filled speech has long been noted. Ancient rhetoricians warned of formulaic endings that appeared without thought. Folklore in some regions even treated unbidden phrases as signs of possession or spirits speaking through the tongue. Today, researchers see it not as outside influence, but as a side effect of prediction. Language is built on probabilities, and the brain often takes the most familiar path forward. The AutoSentence Fill shows that speaking is not always under conscious control. Sometimes the words finish themselves, revealing just how much of language is guided by patterns beneath awareness. Random thought blurt. In 2011, a neurologist in Boston recorded the case of a man who startled his co-workers by blurting out, "Green apples in the ceiling," during a quiet meeting. He wasn't joking, nor did he mean to speak. A stray thought had escaped aloud without his consent. This phenomenon is called the random thought blurt. The glitch occurs when the boundary between inner speech and outer speech breaks down. Most people narrate silently in their minds throughout the day. Usually the brain keeps a tight filter, ensuring these private words stay internal. But sometimes the filter slips, and a fragment of thought slips out into audible speech. Neuroscience studies suggest that the same brain regions involved in producing speech, Broca's area and the supplementary motor cortex, are active during inner speech. Ordinarily, inhibition from the prefrontal cortex prevents these signals from activating the vocal cords. But under stress, fatigue, or distraction, that inhibition may falter, letting a thought spill directly into words. Clinical parallels exist in conditions like Tourette's syndrome, where impulses bypass filters, or in aphasia, where damaged networks lead to unintended utterances. In healthy people, however, these blurts are usually harmless, fleeting errors of control in an otherwise efficient system. Historically, random speech outbursts were often seen as meaningful. In ancient Rome, Unbidden words were sometimes treated as omens. Folklore in parts of Asia framed them as truth slips, moments when the soul revealed hidden thoughts. Modern science reframes the phenomenon more simply, not prophecy, but a filter malfunction. The random thought blurt reveals how thin the barrier is between the voice in the mind and the one we project outward, and how every so often the two briefly collapse into one. The invisible itch. A man sitting at his desk suddenly scratches his arm. A moment later he rubs his neck. The sensation comes and goes quickly, but nothing is there. No insect bite, no irritation, no cause at all. This fleeting but common experience is the invisible itch. Unlike an itch triggered by physical contact, this glitch originates entirely in the nervous system. Neuroscience shows that itch signals are carried by specialized nerve fibers to the spinal cord and then to the brain. But the brain doesn't always wait for a clear trigger. Random bursts of activity along these pathways can be misread as an itch, leading to the urge to scratch an empty spot. Research into phantom sensations highlights the same mechanism. Just as amputees can feel an itch in a missing limb, the nervous system can generate sensations without input. Stress, fatigue, or minor shifts in temperature increase the likelihood of these misfires, making the skin feel alive with signals that don't match reality. Cultural interpretations once treated mysterious itching as symbolic. In parts of Europe, an itchy palm was said to predict money. Folklore across Asia tied random itches to hidden messages. A twitch on the ear meant someone was speaking about you. These interpretations gave meaning to sensations that science now sees as spontaneous neural noise. Clinical observations reveal that invisible itches are usually harmless, though they can become persistent in conditions like neuropathy. For most people, they pass within seconds, leaving only the odd impression of a body reacting to nothing. The invisible itch reminds us that sensation isn't always grounded in the outside world. Sometimes, it is the brain itself that generates touch, creating an urge to scratch what was never really there. Memory gap skip. You finish a conversation, and as you replay it in your mind, one sentence feels missing. The memory moves smoothly up to that point, then resumes as if nothing happened. But the middle is gone. This brief absence is called a memory gap skip. Unlike long-term forgetting, these skips occur in the moment, affecting just a slice of recent experience. Neurologists note that short-term memory relies on fragile working circuits in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. When attention is interrupted or neural encoding falters, those circuits can simply fail to record a fragment. The brain stitches the rest together, leaving a seamless story with one silent cut. Research on eyewitness testimony highlights the effect. In controlled experiments, people asked to recall a short video often left out entire seconds without realizing it. Their accounts flowed smoothly, but the missing pieces were real. Memory gap skips are not empty holes the mind recognizes. They are edits the mind conceals. Clinical reports add another perspective. Patients with epilepsy or migraine sometimes describe their awareness flickering, losing a phrase mid-conversation or a step while walking, only to continue as if uninterrupted. In healthy brains, the same kind of skip can appear under stress, distraction, or sudden shifts of focus. Historical records suggest that similar lapses were long noticed but rarely separated from general forgetfulness. Some Renaissance physicians called them memory eclipses, likening them to the moon covering the sun. Brief, complete, and unsettling. What makes the skip striking is its invisibility. Most memory lapses feel like struggle, but here the gap is hidden by continuity. A memory gap skip isn't a gradual fade or a forgotten detail. It's a clean cut in the reel of experience, leaving awareness with an edited version of events. The AutoPilot sentence. Halfway through a conversation, the words are already leaving your mouth before you realize what you're saying. A routine phrase, something like, sounds good, or no worries, slips out automatically, even when it doesn't quite fit the situation. This reflex is known as the AutoPilot sentence. Language researchers describe it as a product of overlearned speech patterns. Everyday exchanges rely on predictable scripts, greetings, affirmations, polite endings. These scripts are stored in the brain's procedural memory, the same system that governs habits and motor routines. Once triggered, they can unfold without conscious oversight. Neuroscience studies using reaction time experiments show that common phrases activate faster than novel ones. The brain primes them as defaults, allowing conversation to flow smoothly. Most of the time, this saves effort. But under stress or distraction, the automation can take over, producing a reply that's mismatched or strangely out of place. Clinical observations add another layer. People with certain language disorders or after brain injury often lean heavily on stock phrases, demonstrating how deeply embedded they are. Even in healthy speakers, these automatic responses highlight that conversation is not entirely deliberate. It's partly a system of shortcuts. Cultural interpretations have long noticed the phenomenon. In literature and theatre, characters who repeat phrases without awareness are used to signal absent-mindedness, social masks, or even mechanical conformity. Everyday idioms like speaking on autopilot show how familiar the glitch is. Unlike a slip of the tongue, where the wrong word intrudes, the AutoPilot sentence is about the right phrase appearing at the wrong time. It is speech running ahead of thought, leaving awareness to catch up afterward. The AutoPilot sentence reveals conversation as less controlled than it feels, a rhythm guided not only by intention but by reflex. Aging shock. In 2005, psychologists in Chicago interviewed middle-aged adults about their self-image. Many described a jarring moment when they caught their reflection and thought, "That can't be me." The body in the mirror felt older than the person inside. This sudden mismatch is known as aging shock. The glitch comes from the gap between subjective time and physical time. Internally, people often carry a stable sense of self rooted in earlier decades. The inner age that feels younger than the number on paper. But when memory collides with physical evidence, the brain struggles to reconcile the two, producing a moment of disbelief. Neuroscience offers insight. Studies show that the brain does not constantly update self-image. Instead, it relies on stored templates. When new sensory input, wrinkles, grey hair, slower movement, conflicts with the older template, recognition lags. For a moment, the self feels split, one version in memory, another in the present. Clinical observations suggest that these shocks often appear during milestones, birthdays, reunions, or health checkups. Sleep research even notes that dreams can preserve youthful self-images, deepening the contrast upon waking. Cultural interpretations have long given this sensation meaning. Ancient myths often portrayed aging as a sudden curse rather than a gradual process. Folklore in some societies warned that mirrors could reveal the true age of the soul, capturing the same unsettling moment of recognition described today. Science reframes aging shock not as illusion, but as a reminder of how memory and identity lag behind physical change. What actually matters is that aging shock reveals the brain's resistance to updating the self. We don't feel time passing evenly. Instead, it catches us off guard, arriving all at once in the face we no longer expect to see.